Hello and welcome to God Tier Fanfiction. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Naruto was born with Sealing Jutsu to rival Madara? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up and watch more videos like this. Subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
The town of Konoha was ravaged by a monster 14 years ago. It was an enormous nine-tailed fox with flaming orange fur all over its body. Its scarlet pupil eyes exuded an incomprehensible malevolence and malice. Its 9 tails, whose movements had the capacity to demolish mountains and create tsunamis, were its most horrifying characteristic. Numerous shinobi were called upon to fight the beast during this extraordinary crisis, and many of them gave their lives in the line of duty. But only one man, the Yondaime Hokage, was able to vanquish it. He became an enduring hero for coming generations as a result of his fabled deed, which was recorded in history. Even though the day had already begun, the sun was still concealed in the early morning in the town of Konoha due to the little mountain to the east, which covered the entire area with its enormous shadow. A specific elder loved this calm environment and used these times to practice calligraphy. He sat quietly in his chamber, focused entirely on his pastime, his eyes riveted on the paper. He was protected from the chill of the morning air by his long robes. He seemed to be a man of enormous significance to everyone who saw him. Whether it was because of his time-marked face or his fine clothing, his authority was obvious. Above all, though, he was an elder beneath all of this grandeur. His graying beard, hair, wrinkles, and mild baldness all showed how old he was. Sadly, there was going to be a disruption to the elder's practice. From a distance, he could hear his subordinates' hurried footsteps reverberating through the hallways. Shortly after, the door was thrown open, and a man hurried inside. He was dressed in the standard outfit of a seasoned leaf shinobi. A green flak jacket, matching leggings, and a long-sleeved dark blue shirt. The jacket was unusual in that it had multiple pockets to hold scrolls. The Konoha Hite 8, the village's emblem, shone dimly in the early morning light on the shinobi's forehead. His subordinate was already bowed before the elder, speaking to him in a respectful tone while obviously attempting to conceal his annoyance, before he could even inquire as to why the interruption had occurred. Hokage-sama. The Hokage slowly turned to face him, and as soon as he saw the shinobi's expression, a glimmer of comprehension appeared in his eyes. With a frustrated look on his face, the elderly guy questioned, "What is it? Is Naruto causing trouble again?" After learning the identity of the alleged troublemaker, the shinobi appeared even more agitated and quickly reported Naruto's inappropriate behavior. "Yes. Naruto vandalized the Hokage monument. We're searching for him, but no one has managed to find him so far," said the subordinate. The Hokage tried to calm himself by bringing his ancient pipe to his lips and taking a long drag after hearing this. His mind raced with ideas of how to handle the criminal. He was becoming tired of dealing with Naruto's pranks because this wasn't the first time it had happened. The old man let out a cloud of smoke and sighed, deciding what to do. He picked up the hat that was lying next to him, got to his feet, and put it on his head. Now standing, he said, "All right. First let's see the extent of the damage." As he made his way to the edge of the tower where he worked and lived, he would have a clear view of Naruto's creations from there. The Hokage was surprised when he arrived to the rooftop. There was vandalism on each of the monument's 4 faces. The thing that annoyed him the most was the huge, cartoonish nosebleed on his own face, which had been sculpted long ago to represent his young appearance. The most embarrassing thing was the phrase, "pervert," scribbled over his forehead. His cheeks were painted pink as if he were ashamed. The old guy had not been so irritated by such foolishness in years. Many would find it impressive to witness the Hokage, who was renowned for his generosity and wisdom, twitching his left eyebrow. The Hokage looked at the nearest subordinate and spoke after taking a few deep breaths to control his rage. "Who's searching for that idiot right now?" "2 teams of Chunin, Hokage-sama. They've been after him for at least 15 minutes, the nervous-looking shinobi retorted. The elderly Hokage remarked, "Order them to return. When Naruto wants to hide, finding him is no easy task." After taking a quick drag from his pipe, he considered who may find the offender more easily as the nicotine took hold of his lungs. "Call Iruka, too. He's already used to that troublemaker's antics. Finding him won't be a problem for him," the Hokage continued before his subordinate departed to carry out his orders. "Hi, Hokage-sama." The shinobi hurried off to carry out his commands. The Hokage once again took on a frustrated expression as he observed his subordinate go. Naruto's pranks, which the child claimed were works of art but were really just cheap vandalism, made him notorious. The Hokage felt accountable for the young rebel's actions, Therefore they just received a reprimand instead of the harsh penalty that would have been meted out to anyone else who did what the boy did. What am I going to do with you, Naruto? A boy was rolling on the ground, giggling uncontrollably, near the top of the mountain that houses the Hokage monument. His striking height of 1.65 meters, 5 feet 5 inches, was uncommon for someone his age, making him stand out from the Konoha locals. His spiky red hair, which reached his chin, was another eye-catching characteristic that helped him stand out in a crowd. His skin tone was slightly tanned, which was more typical among the villagers. The most distinctive feature of his eyes, though, was their amethyst-like purple hue, which made an impression on everyone who saw them. The redhead tried to slow his breathing after having a great time. He was laughing so hard that his stomach ached, but he quickly lost control and started laughing once more. It was precious to recall the ancient Hokage's face and the shinobi looking for him after thinking about his accomplishment. It had all been worthwhile to work on his artwork the previous evening. The delinquent found it extremely difficult to paint the monument covertly, especially considering the attire he was wearing. The uniform itself wasn't very noteworthy. It was just a pair of shinobi sandals, pants, a jacket knotted around his waist, and a chainmail shirt like to those used by training shinobi. The vivid orange hue of the jacket and pants, which no one would anticipate from someone attempting to blend in, was the issue. However, the redhead would never acknowledge its shortcomings because he loved the hue so much. Gia ha ha ha. I can't ha 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 take it anymore, ha ha ha. I need to stop, ha ha ha. My stomach already hurts. The adolescent exclaimed as he rose from the ground, struggling once more to contain his laughing. The redhead, who hadn't spotted the visitor, was taken aback when a new voice said, I see you're having fun, Naruto. His appearance was typical of the villagers. Brown hair tied back in a short ponytail, coal-black eyes, and tanned skin. He was dressed in the standard Konoha shinobi attire. If it weren't for the scar that ran horizontally across the bridge of his nose, his appearance would be even more unremarkable. The redhead was taken aback, but it took him a few moments to stop laughing. He took a final long breath before answering the newcomer, and as soon as he stood up, he gently wiped off his clothes to get rid of the dust. I think I've never laughed so much in my life, Iruka-sensei. The teenager, who had calmed down, remarked. His expression, especially with the smile on his face, could appear to a stranger to be one of complete joy. But Iruka was familiar with the teenager. The Chunin was desperate to stop Naruto from escaping, as seen by his stiff physique and slightly bowed knees. However, Naruto's familiar tone when referring to him as sensei, almost as if he were making fun of him, was what truly disturbed the teacher. Iruka, a shinobi noted for his seriousness, stated sarcastically, I'm glad you had fun, Naruto, but class is about to start, and I doubt you were planning to skip it, right? The redhead was observing his sensei in the same way that Iruka was examining Naruto. Iruka had a vein pulsating in his temple, and it was obvious that he was quite agitated. Iruka would undoubtedly force Naruto to clean up his art, but he had no interest in listening to the elder's lesson. Skip class? Of course not, Iruka-sensei. A model student like me could never do such a thing. The redhead exclaimed, trying to look as innocent as a kabuki performer in one of the world's major cities. The redhead's acting prowess caught Iruka off guard. Naruto's performance was still outstanding, despite the fact that he had seen it numerous times. Naturally, if someone already knew the young man was lying, it made no difference how effective his act was. The older shinobi said, so you wouldn't mind accompanying me to the academy, would you? Iruka concluded, expressing all the annoyance he had suppressed up until that point. We can even discuss the punishment for your little prank today on the way. Sure, just let me. He threw his smoke bomb, an emergency tactic he usually carried with him, before the redhead could finish speaking. Naruto ran toward his getaway without thinking. Having witnessed this numerous times, he was aware that an experienced shinobi such as Iruka would not be deterred by a single smoke bomb. He seemed more irritated than shocked. Speaking of Iruka, the shinobi, who knew the offender well, had seen this strategy before. It wouldn't be difficult to catch him. The smoke was merely an annoying annoyance that made it necessary for him to use his hearing to find the young man. Shouting in a forceful tone, Iruka ran after the redhead without letting Naruto get too far. Stop right there, Naruto. You know very well that you can't escape from me. The redhead continued to run faster, ignoring his sensei's yell. Iruka, you're not going to catch me this time. With a cheeky smirk on his face and determined gaze, he thought. His veins were pumping with adrenaline, and he was getting farther away from capture with every stride. In Konoha, the temperature was starting to drop, a sign that the seasons would soon change. Because of its position, the village rarely saw severe winters, and snowfall was an uncommon and unexpected occurrence for the locals. Nevertheless, this did not stop the bitterly cold wind from blowing that day. It was already the end of October, and every gust caused the trees to shake, spilling innumerable orange leaves. From the academy's windows, one could enjoy this lovely sight. All of the students in their last year at the Shinobi Academy, however, ignored this spectacle in favor of focusing on the red-headed delinquent, who was lying in front of the class with his arms and legs securely bound. After trying to flee, Naruto was still breathing heavily. His clothing, which was previously marred by paint splatters, was now covered with dirt, scrapes, and dry leaves. Iruka, on the other hand, was flawless as he stood in front of him. His hair was styled properly, his clothing was flawlessly tailored, and it seemed as though the frenzied chase had had no effect on his attitude at all. The young, ambitious shinobi caught his breath and wondered where things had gone wrong. The idea was straightforward. He would decorate the Hokage monument with his artwork, admire the outcome, and then sleep in his refuge for the remainder of the day. But the picture of the ancient Hokage's furious expression crept into his mind. Everything was going really well. I would have succeeded if I hadn't wasted so much time laughing, Naruto bemoaned. The young redhead couldn't help but blame Iruka for his misery, even if he ultimately believed that he was to blame for getting caught. The teacher was the only person he could never get rid of out of everyone who followed him following his antics. He was so annoyed that he glared at Iruka since he could never outperform him. Humph! Naruto huffed, furious, and to think that I won't have managed to get away from him before I graduate. All the happiness he had felt from his act at the Hokage monument vanished at the mere notion. However, Iruka was not at all pleased with his pupil's actions. In addition to his frequent vandalism, the juvenile seldom ever attended courses and, when he did, he invariably produced some sort of commotion. Tomorrow is the graduation exam. You've already failed the last 2 times. This isn't the time to cause trouble, you idiot. Iruka scolded his disruptive pupil, his vein pulsating in his temple. Yeah, the troublemaker said contemptuously, making a concerted effort to contain a cheeky grin. The delinquent was content with this minor act of retaliation for getting caught, even though he knew that it would just aggravate his teacher even more. The twitch in Iruka's eyebrow indicated that his mood was at its lowest, much to his delight. But this spectacle was short-lived, as the shinobi quickly turned to his class and feigned a smile. The teacher yelled, "All right then. It's time for a surprise test on Henge no Jutsu. Form a line," in an authoritative tone. Outraged by the unexpected call, a number of students yelled together, "What? Transform perfectly into me. And if anyone wants to blame someone for this, blame Naruto," Iruka said, dismissing the criticism. As soon as this comment was made, the troublemaker's classmates gave him an angry look and were prepared to make their own allegations. "You want to play like this, then?" Iruka's attempt to punish Naruto by using his classmates did not come as a surprise. If the redhead was interested in getting along with the younger students, the tactic might even succeed. The delinquent had developed an aversion to developing bonds, or at least that was what he told himself after multiple unsuccessful attempts in prior years. Iruka immediately severed the cords that bound Naruto, shattering his reverie. The adolescent hurried to the end of the forming line, not even bothering to glance at his teacher. Iruka carefully evaluated each of his pupils while the redhead pouted and considered ways to exact revenge. His earlier displays of annoyance appeared to be a reflection of his professionalism and a daydream. In the end, this dedication led him to work as a teacher at the Shinobi Academy, a highly esteemed post because the village's leaders wouldn't want an inept teacher instructing the future generation. Naruto couldn't help but mentally gripe as he observed his peers being assessed on the test. What a drag. The troublemaker was in his last year at the academy for the 3rd time, and because he had little more to study, he concentrated on improving his abilities. With the exception of one element, the same point that had caused his earlier failures, his command of the fundamental jutsus was on par with that of an experienced genin. "This is all your fault, dead last," the boy muttered, clearly irritated, as his time drew near. "As if I cared, dog breath," Naruto scornfully shot out. Falling for the redhead's bait, the boy said, "What? Do you want me to rub your face in the dirt, you idiot?" Iruka's forceful voice stopped the students' debate from getting worse. "That's enough, both of you. Naruto, it's your turn, so get over here," he said. "You turn everyone against me and then become upset over the outcome?" The redhead became irritated and yelled in his head. But all of a sudden, he had a wonderful idea. A cheeky grin appeared on his face. "Yes, I am aware. Although I haven't tried it yet, if it works. Iruka, you're going to receive a surprise. Giahahaha." The redhead yelled, Henge no Jutsu. As a veil of smoke swiftly covered his body. A startling image appeared in front of the class as the smoke started to fade. At roughly 1.80 meters, 5 feet 11 inches, the figure was tall for a lady. Her beautiful red hair, which was styled in pigtails and almost reached her heels, was the first feature that drew everyone's attention. It was difficult not to be astounded by her exquisite features, which appeared to have been handcrafted. Her expression only served to accentuate her surreal appearance, giving off a sexual air that was made all the more alluring by the unique hue of her purple eyes. The fact that her body was nearly entirely exposed, just as it had been on the day of her birth, was what really startled the class. Everyone was astonished and dumbfounded by her sexual attraction, which was only enhanced by the smoke covering her private areas, which was just enough to maintain her modesty. The outcome was immediate. For most of the prepubescent guys, that image was too much. While the more impressionable responded with modest reactions, such as nosebleeds, the more covert ones. To put it mildly, they would have to change their underpants. The girls, however, responded rather differently. There was a lot of embarrassment and fury, but some people couldn't help but be envious of the redhead. If they possessed her attractiveness, they thought how simple it would be to win over a particular boy. But Iruka's response was the most extreme. His total lack of experience with the other sex was one of the worst embarrassments of his life. His serious demeanor made it challenging for him to establish relationships and find constructive ways to release his tension. Iruka's inability to restrain himself was not surprising given this baggage, or rather, the absence of it. His logic was on the verge of breaking. The poor teacher was overwhelmed by the redhead's remarks. "Could you give me a private lesson, Iruka-kun?" His legs, now weak, finally gave way and he fell backward as a massive amount of blood started to pour out of his nose. When Naruto saw the outcome of his jutsu, he lost control and reversed the transformation, collapsing to the ground and laughing uncontrollably. The troublemaker said, "Gia ha 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 ha. I can't believe it, ha 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 ha. He really fell for my Oiroke no Jutsu, ha 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 ha," in between giggles. Upon hearing this, Iruka's arousal and humiliation were swiftly replaced by an almost tangible fury. The veins in his temple pulsed, and his eyebrows twitched constantly. The teacher yelled at the top of his lungs, "You idiot! Don't invent stupid skills," while trying desperately not to punch the redhead. The delinquent's laughter was only heightened by this outburst of rage. In Konoha, autumn afternoons had a unique quality. Even though the season was almost finished, it was still possible to take in the breathtaking beauty of the orange leaves that were left on the trees, combining with the sunset's scarlet sky. The summit of the Hokage Monument was the greatest spot to take in this scenery. However, due of a particular teacher-student pair, it would be challenging to enjoy it today. Sitting on the Yondaime Hokage's sculpted head, Iruka observed a grumpy Naruto attempting to tidy up the mess he had caused throughout the night by rubbing the slain hero's face with a rag. The redhead had fled from his teacher for a considerable amount of time after spending the night painting the Hokage monument, so this pout was not wholly unwarranted. The teenager had planned, at the least, to sleep in his seat undisturbed after being apprehended and hauled into the classroom. Iruka, on the other hand, was unwilling to comply and made sure Naruto was paying attention in class by continually grabbing his attention. The delinquent became even more irritated as a result, and in response, he tried to irritate Iruka as much as possible by making offensive remarks and making fresh attempts to flee. At the midst of the commotion created by the two's confrontation, no one at the Shinobi Academy could study. The worst part was that Iruka had hauled the 10 without his desk or bento, which meant he had to go without food all day. In conclusion, Naruto was exhausted, drowsy, and hungry, and Iruka's demeanor did not improve the young redhead's mood. Iruka said, "You're not going home until you make all of this spotless, Naruto," with his usual serious expression. "Humph. It's not like anyone is waiting for me at home anyway." Although the redhead's remark first sounded annoyed or even uninterested, anyone who was paying attention could see a fleeting hint of melancholy in his countenance, which Iruka also saw. Normally, the delinquent was unaffected by remarks reminding him that he was an orphan, but because that day was so awful, it was difficult for him to not take his teacher's remarks negatively, especially when they came from Iruka. The teacher's normally solemn countenance briefly showed regret, and it was clear that he had no intention of causing harm. Damn. Iruka looked down at the young guy, clearly offended by his remark, and thought to himself, I, more than anyone, should know not to say that to an orphan. Iruka was aware that his comment could be taken as offensive even if it wasn't. Given that the redhead had just grown to loathe him, it was practically his duty to restate what he had said. Iruka started, trying to find the perfect words to avoid making his connection with the juvenile worse. Naruto. What is it now? The young guy asked, raising his head and casting a suspicious glance at his teacher. Iruka, clearly embarrassed by his earlier actions, scratched his now rosy cheeks and said, If you clean everything properly, how about I treat you to ramen at Ichiraku tonight? Naruto thought a little before responding, well. The student-teacher relationship was not as strong as it once was, and the redhead had been asking more and more questions lately regarding his education. But the teenager was adept at interpreting people's facial expressions, and now Iruka appeared to be at least attempting to mend their relationship. With his fox-like smile, he said, if you're paying, how can I refuse? Iruka-sensei might not be as awful as I initially believed. In addition, I'm starving to death. It was a bustling early evening in Konoha's business district. Since many shinobi were wrapping up their shifts at this hour, it was not unusual to observe this influx of people. It was normal for many shinobi to turn to wine or a satisfying meal for solace after a demanding workday because being a shinobi was a dangerous lifestyle and death was always a possibility. Ichiraku, a little ramen restaurant, was situated in the middle of all this activity. With only 5 chairs, it was small, and maybe this is why people who chose to give the eatery a try were taken aback by its welcoming ambiance. Naturally, a decent restaurant is built of more than just a pleasant setting. The caliber of the food they provide is crucial. Ichiraku was unique in this sense. The responsible pair was a young girl in her teens and a man who looked to be in his middle years. The young lady helped with the lighter jobs in the kitchen and mainly served the guests, which is precisely what she was doing at that moment. The older man was the owner and chef, and he was in charge of much of the dish preparation. Here's a shoyu ramen for Iruka-san and a miso ramen for you, Naruto. I asked Dad to add a little extra pork just for you, hehehe, the young lady remarked, giving the miscreant a wink. The redhead shouted, thank you so much. You're amazing, Ayame ne, and immediately began eating. Iruka was astounded by how quickly his pupil destroyed the food. Both had visited Ichiraku previously. After years of education, Iruka had developed a deeper understanding of the delinquent, and periodically taking him out to supper had become second nature. But without Iruka's awareness, the teacher-student pair had grown apart during the previous year. He thought about this again, realizing that he couldn't recall the redhead's ravenous appetite. We used to frequently visit this place. Naruto, when did things start to change? The shinobi stopped eating to think about how to make things better, trying to think of the best way to strike up a conversation. Perhaps I could begin by challenging the latest practical jokes. Even though Naruto has always been a troublemaker, he finds painting the Hokage monument to be too much. Iruka turned to his pupil and said, Naruto. Huh? Naruto asked indifferently while continuing to chew. With an attempt at empathy, Iruka questioned, why did you do that to the Hokage monument? Don't you know who those people are? He had learnt from educating the delinquent that if he displayed anger, the redhead might turn against him. Duh. Of course I know, the redhead said, seemingly insulted by the inquiry. Iruka, for his part, arched an eyebrow, wondering if his pupil truly understood what he was discussing. It wouldn't be the first time the teenager boasted and ultimately provided an entirely incorrect response. The people who received the title of Hokage are the best shinobi of their time and, therefore, led the village. Satisfied, Iruka-sensei? Naruto said in a whiny tone, making it clear to his instructor that he was an expert on the subject. Iruka became enraged, and his eyes hardened. He was aware that Naruto was aware of the significance of the figures he had damaged, yet it was still wrong for him to do so. Iruka found it difficult to accept disrespect for the heroes who gave their life to the village. And among them is the Yondaime Hokage, the hero who defeated the demon fox, the Kyuubi, the redhead went on. His deed was all the more puzzling because anyone who heard him talk could see how much he admired the hero. Iruka thought it was absurd to deface the faces of those you greatly admire. Iruka could hardly contain his annoyance as he asked his pupil, so, why? Why vandalize their faces? Simple. It was a declaration of war. The teenager said gravely, one day, I will become Hokage. Not only that, I will be the greatest Hokage, surpassing all who came before me, including the Yondaime, he declared with a determined and upbeat tone. In addition to having faith in his statements, the redhead was positive that he would accomplish his goals. Iruka resumed his meal with a barely veiled smirk, saying, I understand. But vandalizing the Hokage monument won't help you get there. First, you need to become a shinobi, and so far, you've failed twice. Now that their chat had put him at ease, there was a note of playfulness in his voice. Perhaps I see too much of myself in him. Iruka reasoned, Just because we are similar doesn't mean our actions carry the same motivations. Naruto sarcastically said, "Thanks for the reminder." There was something in his eyes that showed how much previous failures troubled him, even though his face remained assured. In between bites, Iruka said, "By the way, are you prepared for the test tomorrow?" His tone changed to that of a teacher who worried about his students' success in addition to wanting to play. Naruto asked, frowning and obviously upset about the impending exam, Why'd I have to do the Bunshin no Jutsu to become a shinobi? I remember that Rock Lee graduated last year without having to go through this." "Naruto, we've talked about this. Lee is a special case, and that doesn't apply to you," Iruka said, feeling a little uneasy about the inquiry. This was not the first time his pupil had brought it up. The shinobi thought, maybe this is one of the reasons we've drifted apart. The redhead cynically fired back, expressing his contempt for a system that had already let him down twice. "TCH, and why is that? I heard that a Jonin supported him. So is that it? You just need someone with influence to become a shinobi?" Iruka, on the other hand, appeared even more uneasy. He would concur with his pupil if he were being honest with himself. Iruka was well aware of Naruto's aptitudes and saw that the teenager was comparable to his peers in terms of practical capabilities. In reality, Naruto would rank among the top students in the class if it weren't for the Bunshin no Jutsu. Listen, as I said, Lee had several special circumstances, and the support he received was just one of them. For starters, Lee's theoretical scores were much higher than yours, Iruka said, hitting Naruto's weakness. Despite having exceptional practical skills, his academic performance was dismal. In both past and present years, he has regularly received the lowest grades in the class. "Humph," Naruto complained, obviously not pleased with his sensei's answer. Iruka concluded his meal by saying, "Anyway, you'd better get ready for tomorrow. I've already failed you twice. I don't want to have to do it again." After paying for both lunches, the teacher stood up and departed. Sitting there, Naruto thought about what had been said. He felt more assured this year than he had in the past. He thought his chances of graduation were genuine. "I can't fail again," was the only thought that crossed his mind as he got up and made his way back to his small apartment. "I have to graduate this time." The Konoha Shinobi Academy was in a happy mood the following morning. After 6 arduous years of preparation, the majority of students were certain that they would eventually graduate. Although the final test failure rate was incredibly low, almost 60% of the students had dropped out. With the exception of Naruto, this fact was well known and boosted confidence in the classroom. He was among the first to come and was reclining on his desk, clearly showing the effects of the previous night's lack of sleep with black bags under his eyes. The redhead had a difficult night. He was genuinely anxious about the graduation exam for the first time. The first attempt is often the most agonizing, and Naruto's was no exception. He could still recall the first time he took the test, as if I could forget. He was so full of confidence that it was impossible for him to fail. He thought he could do 90% of the necessary practical abilities, with the exception of the Bunshin no Jutsu, and had passed the theoretical test, which he discarded. You can only imagine how shocked he was to learn that this method was part of the test and that a student would fail it right away if they couldn't use it. After all, the theory was that a person couldn't graduate if they couldn't master something so fundamental. The second failure was frustrating if the first was shocking. Naruto put in countless hours of labor, blood, and sweat over the course of the year in an attempt to master the Bunshin no Jutsu. Even after studying scrolls about chakra theory, which he detested, he was still unable to execute the jutsu after almost a year. The hardest part was that he had no idea why it was just not doable. He became increasingly desperate as the test date drew nearer. He tried in vain to ask Iruka for assistance, but he was flatly turned down. The redhead remembered his instructor's justification and said, "I can't show favoritism, Naruto." What a bunch of nonsense, he pondered. Naruto didn't even show up for the test because he knew he had no chance of passing. Instead, he spent the day exercising until he was exhausted, letting out all the rage that was stuck in his throat. When he learned that Rock Lee, a young guy with thick eyebrows who was one of the few classmates he got along with, had graduated, his rage only intensified. This wouldn't have been an issue on its own because Naruto wasn't naturally envious. He was annoyed that Lee was unable to execute any ninjutsu, including the Bunshin no Jutsu. When Naruto found it, he went straight to ask Iruka how he could have been rejected when someone who couldn't utilize any ninjutsu graduate had merely failed at the Bunshin no Jutsu. Iruka's answer was far from adequate. His teacher just sidestepped the question, which made the young offender even more irate. Anybody would normally give up after a strike like that, but Naruto was not like that. His resolve was only strengthened by this. The redhead encountered many challenges in his life, and genuine moments of joy were few and far between. He was certain of one thing, though. Demonstrating to those who doubted him that he was capable of greatness was what made him happiest. For the troublemaker, witnessing the faces contorted in a mixture of rage, incredulity, and even a tinge of terror was a therapeutic experience, and it all hinged on his effort. Even if he didn't give up after being turned down a second time, it was still a setback. It had a powerful enough effect to cause him to give up the foolish Bunshin no Jutsu practice and devote the entire year to his mischievous activities, which included everything from simple vandalism to putting laxatives in the Inuzuka's ninkin. For 6 months, the redhead lived in this state of uncertainty, hardly going to school and completely upending the lives of anyone who annoyed him. But after speaking with Mizuki, the new assistant teacher that year, this era ended. Surprisingly, Naruto didn't be reprimanded by Mizuki for pulling a practical joke. Mizuki, on the other hand, commended him. The assistant teacher said his practical jokes were brilliant. A prank is not much different from a sabotage mission, Naruto-kun. What you do may seem insignificant, but for someone more observant, it's impossible not to notice your talent. Naruto, skeptical, asked why he believed that, and the response just made him more astounded. The two became closer after that, and Naruto eventually confided in Mizuki about his issue with the Bunshin no Jutsu, which the teacher was more than happy to assist with. Mizuki found the problem, something initially unbelievable. During the additional training sessions, Naruto had a lot of chakra, which was keeping him from mastering the Bunshin no Jutsu. Even a pupil from a civilian family may do the jutsu because it was intended to be a starting technique needing little chakra. But Naruto lacked the perfected control required to prevent overpowering the jutsu, and his chakra reserves were on par with those of a cage. The additional classes were halted when that was dismissed. While Naruto carried on with the fundamental exercises, Mizuki promised to look into other options. It was better than doing nothing, even if they appeared pointless. But when time went on and no results showed up, Naruto started thinking about taking further chances. As it happens, the redhead had previously acquired a scroll. God knows how much he detested academic material, so he wasn't entirely sure where he had found it or why he had chosen to read it. However, he opened it for some reason, and it was perhaps the longest he had ever read anything with all of his attention. The scroll, An Introduction to Fuinjutsu, was written by Uzumaki Ashina and discussed this arcane and esoteric skill that used writing to change reality. Like a sponge, Naruto took in everything from the scroll. He had already mastered everything the scroll had to give in less than 3 months, which would have surprised everyone, including himself, because Fuinjutsu was infamously difficult. However, that was insufficient. He soon started playing with seals, altering them and making versions of the ones he was familiar with. If he hadn't used the seals in one of his practical jokes, which caused the Hokage to learn of his new pastime, this would have gone on for a very long time. Normally, the old Hokage didn't give a damn about his shenanigans, but he was furious this time. He claimed that practicing Fuinjutsu alone without supervision was extremely risky for a beginner. Despite Naruto's attempts to dispute, the Hokage had already decided that the redhead would not be allowed to practice Fuinjutsu until he was a genin. He would be eliminated entirely from the system if he disobeyed. But now the redhead was in a difficult situation. He was aware that he could use the Tenketsu to construct a seal that would restrict the quantity of chakra in his system, but doing so would require defying the previous Hokage. Naruto realized that the Hokage was still in charge of the village and would keep his promise if he found out that the redhead had disobeyed him, regardless of how kind he was. But since he was Naruto, there was nothing he could do but take a chance. Mizuki's response to his concept was not entirely positive. The first reaction was worry that the redhead might be found. Naruto countered that this was his only choice. Mizuki-sensei, I know it's risky. If Hokage Jiji finds out, my career will be over before it even starts. But if I become a shinobi, I'll be risking my life all the time. So why not start now? This was one of the few occasions when Naruto was speaking sincerely, despite the fact that many might assume it was just another of his innumerable moments of arrogance. His statements had the tone of unwavering confidence that characterizes someone who is prepared to take any and all risks. And Mizuki was more than persuaded by that. Observing his student's tenacity, Mizuki consented to assist him in secretly creating the seal. Thus, the Fuinjutsu Nagale Seigen was finished with less than a month till the final exam. But a new issue emerged. Even though the seal had reduced the quantity of chakra in Naruto's system, he was still having trouble controlling himself. It was something that could be fixed, but mastering it would take time, which the young redhead lacked. Even though Naruto was able to execute the Bunshin no Jutsu in around half of his efforts, it was still insufficient to give him confidence. He was now quite nervous because of this. Failure had never scared the redhead since he always saw it as a setback that he could get past. However, today was not the same. For the first time, he had been helped out of conviction rather than compassion or duty. Mizuki had faith in him and his abilities. Naruto was accustomed to everyone discrediting him. This sudden self-assurance was unfamiliar and weighty, a load he was unsure of how to bear. Even if he was anxious, it didn't matter anymore. Iruka and Mizuki had just entered the classroom, and their gazes briefly locked. His sensei's goal was evident without a word. He had faith in him. What had formerly made him anxious now made him feel at ease. Disregard everything else. After overcoming more difficult circumstances, you finally have the opportunity to graduate. Naruto, put an end to the drama and concentrate. The redhead yelled in his head. Iruka started the last class at 8:30 while he was wrapping up the paperwork in his hands. Well, class, as we discussed last week, you have already completed the theoretical test. Today will be the practical test, which will include the execution of the 3 basic ninjutsu: Kawarimi no Jutsu, Henge no Jutsu, and Bunshin no Jutsu. There will also be a marksmanship test with Bukajutsu and, finally, a taijutsu match. Remember, if you fail any of the ninjutsu, you will be immediately disqualified. Iruka paused after his lengthy speech to allow the pupils to process what he had spoken. The instructor handed some papers to his assistant and said, "Now Mizuki-sensei will call each of you, one by one. Those who are called should go alone to the next room, before making his way to the testing area. So let's get started, class." Aburame Shino, Mizuki-sensei began the roll call. "Very well, Naruto, your taijutsu is a pass." Iruka, who had been watching the young redhead and his helper Mizuki spar intently, cut them off and praised his pupil's performance. The teacher said, "Take a few minutes to catch your breath and then go to room 9 for your final test," after completing his notes on Naruto's performance. Naruto, on the other hand, had been lying on the ground since the end of the spar, not because he was tired. It would take much more than that to exhaust the delinquent, but rather because he was nervous. It was time for the Bunshin no Jutsu as he had already finished all the tests. Why couldn't the foolish Bunshin be the first? The redhead thought cruelly. Mizuki, who was reportedly waiting for his student to gather his breath, asked, "Nervous?" "More like excited," said the young arrogant. The assistant teacher extended his hand to assist Naruto in standing up as he was saying, "Great, I was worried that your nerves might affect your performance, but I guess you were just overthinking it." Naruto gladly accepted. He said, "You know me, Mizuki-sensei, it's impossible for me to be nervous." However, anyone who looked closely could see that the teenager was nervous. Mizuki noticed numerous indications of this, including the perspiration pouring down his brow and the way his hand kept opening and shutting. "All right, it's good that you're confident, but remember that even if something goes wrong, I'll be here to help you." Naruto experienced a surge of emotion upon hearing these words. His face lit up with a smile, but it wasn't the broad, defiant grin he normally wore to cover up his fears or when he was going to cause trouble. It was a small, genuine smile that only raised the corners of his mouth to show true joy. "Thank you, Mizuki-sensei." They both reached room 9 in this confident atmosphere. Mizuki put his final hand on Naruto's shoulder before going inside, whistling as usual before continuing, saying, "Good luck, Naruto-kun. I know you can do it." Naruto only nodded in response, not believing that his voice would be sufficient. He then went into the room with Mizuki to take the last, decisive test. "The same as last year, Naruto. You just need to execute the 3 basic ninjutsu to graduate. Oh, and no more of your stupid tricks, or I'll fail you on the spot," Iruka replied. Naruto said, "All right," as a drop of perspiration trickled down his cheeks. The redhead had no trouble performing the Kawarimi no Jutsu and the Henge no Jutsu, but for some reason, he lacked chakra control at the time. In spite of this, the adolescent was able to execute the jutsu satisfactorily, simultaneously changing into Iruka and Mizuki. Iruka's tone was stern, but anybody who knew him could sense that he was nervous. "Good execution of the Kawarimi and Henge, Naruto. Now, you just need to perform the Bunshin no Jutsu to graduate." His conscience was troubled by the idea of failing Naruto for the 3rd time. "The moment has arrived. The Fuinjutsu, Nagale Seigen, is now active. I'll be successful if I perform as I did during training." In an attempt to manage his nervousness, Naruto mentally repeated these phrases like a mantra. Iruka responded, "You can start, Naruto. privately hoping that the redhead would be successful this time. With a forceful gulp, Naruto formed the required hand seals and yelled resolutely, "Bunshin no Jutsu." The air was filled with a thick cloud of white smoke. As the smoke cleared, Iruka's expression changed from one of increasing fear to one of disappointment. Despite all the effort, Naruto's clone was lying on the ground, looking more like a delicate shadow and nearly dead, with the expression of a person near death. Even a baby would not be in danger from that clone, let alone a shinobi. Regretfully, Iruka was aware that he could not ignore this. Naruto was shocked to see his clone's terrible condition. Frustration took over, causing his body to shiver and his fists and teeth to tighten. "I failed once more." Iruka yelled, "You failed," and shook the redhead out of his amazement. "Iruka-sensei," Mizuki said, his face showing sympathy. "This is Naruto's third attempt, and he managed to create a clone. We could let him pass." "Mizuki-sensei." The delinquent reflected, appreciative of his teacher's unanticipated support. "After all your help, you still." To the teen's chagrin, Iruka shook his head in refusal and said, "We can't do what you're suggesting, Mizuki-sensei. Everyone else made at least 3 clones. Naruto only made 1, and look at his state. We can't let him pass." The teenager gave the rejection a bitter glare. "I knew it. He despises me." As he marched out of the testing room, trying to disguise his hurt, Naruto yelled in his head that Iruka had betrayed him. Everyone could hear applause for the accomplishments. The just graduating shinobi were celebrating with their loved ones. For these young people, who had undergone extensive training and were now officially acknowledged as village defenders, it was a memorable day. "That's my boy, I'm so proud of you. Tonight, Mom will make your favorite dish. And, now we're all adults," were among the crowd's cries. Naruto was seated on a swing, taking in the surroundings. All that was left on his face after all the initial annoyance was melancholy. Sigh. No matter how many times the youngster told himself, "Come on, Naruto, you can't let this get you down." Crying never solved anything. However, it was difficult to avoid feeling guilty as he saw all of his younger classmates graduate while he would be confined to the academy for a further year. "I'll overcome this tomorrow, but today, it hurts so much right now." One of the mothers at the graduation asked a woman who appeared to be her acquaintance, "Hey, is that the boy?" "Yes, that's him. The only one who failed," the companion said, clearly contemptuous. "HMPH. What a relief," the mother exclaimed. The intense animosity these two had for the young redhead was obvious to everyone. The woman said, "Can you imagine if that boy became a shinobi? It's because he is." "Hey, we can't talk about that. It's forbidden." The mother abruptly cut her friend off. After hearing everything, Naruto couldn't help but become enraged. "What did I do to deserve this? It's always the same thing. Those looks, that contempt. As if it were a sin for me to exist." Unfortunately, Naruto wasn't only perceived in this way by those two. The boy had endured this kind of treatment his entire life, so he was already accustomed to it, but that didn't lessen the agony. "I should leave this place." With an uncommon frown on his face, the criminal got up from the swing and hurried out of the place, thinking, "Staying will only make me feel worse." 2 figures watched the redhead leave the group of parents and graduates. "Iruka, I need to talk to you," the third Hokage remarked. His countenance was somewhat hidden by the shade of his hat, but there was a glimmer of worry in his eyes. "Hi, Hokage-sama," Iruka said cautiously, not knowing what to anticipate from the discussion with the elderly leader. The young teacher had already had a difficult day, particularly after what he had been made to do, and he hoped that this discussion wouldn't make him feel even more hopeless. Naruto, who was now a little further away, pondered his next move. Going home now is never a good idea. The redhead never went back to his tiny apartment since he was alone there and left to contemplate his thoughts, which only made him feel worse. "I think I'll train," Naruto said, but before he could go, he heard footsteps getting closer. He turned around and saw one of the last individuals he wanted to see at that very time. "Naruto," Mizuki called, his voice sympathetic. With a look of intense humiliation on his face, Naruto answered, "Mizuki-sensei." "Come on, let's talk in a quieter place," Mizuki said, grinning slightly. As the sun started to fall, shadows spread across Konoha's terrain, casting orange hues across the sky. People flooded the streets, which were filled with shadows and golden light. Local businesses eagerly awaited graduation days, as many families went out to celebrate their children's accomplishments and possibly purchase gifts as incentives. Naruto and Mizuki saw the incident from the edge of a balcony. The stillness between them was finally broken by Naruto, who was still wearing a dejected and ashamed expression. In contrast to his typically assured tone, Naruto's voice was heavy with shame as he stated, "I'm sorry, Mizuki-sensei. After all the extra training you gave me, I still couldn't pass." Mizuki appeared to be searching for the appropriate words to reassure his pupil, his face twisted in concern. "You don't need to apologize, Naruto-kun. I trained you because I saw potential in you, and just because you failed doesn't mean that potential no longer exists," Mizuki said in an attempt to console the adolescent. With a slightly sour tone, Naruto admitted, "I know that, Mizuki-sensei. It's just that I wanted to make you proud, you know? No one has ever helped me as much. Hell, you even tried to convince Iruka-sensei to pass me." He named the person who had let him down. The Ruvo was shocked to hear Mizuki say, "You don't need to blame Iruka-sensei, Naruto-kun. It turns out that Iruka-sensei probably identifies with you." "Humph. He hates me. Don't you see how he's always on my case?" sighed. The Ruvo had lost faith in Iruka after today. Their relationship had been failing ever before Rock Lee was accepted, and today was the final straw for Naruto. Mizuki studied his pupil's face intently. He became aware of the boy's mistrust during the training period. Naruto always appeared to assume that everyone detested him, which makes sense given his upbringing. "It's not that he hates you. Iruka-sensei is just a serious person. His parents were killed when he was very young, and he has had to rely on himself ever since," Mizuki said. Mizuki and Iruka had been friends for a long time. They had attended the same academy and, while not being on the same team, they had occasionally finished missions together. "I think what he really wants is for you to become strong, no matter what happens. Try to understand his side a bit. Being an orphan, I'm sure you can relate." Naruto couldn't help but think after hearing this. It struck a chord with him to learn that Iruka was also an orphan. The redhead imagined that if he were in Iruka's shoes, he would make the same demands. In the same way that Mizuki-sensei had assisted him, he too imagined himself contributing more. His rage for Iruka subsided somewhat as a result of all this contemplation, but it remained unabated. "All right, Mizuki-sensei. I won't stay sulking. I'll leave that to Sasuke Teme, haha," Naruto said, trying to cheer himself up with his trademark smile. Mizuki grinned as he said, "Ha ha ha, well, now that you seem more excited, I have a surprise for you." His eyes briefly glowed in a strange way. "Curious," Naruto said, "huh?" Although it was unexpected, Mizuki's remark made Naruto feel better. The boy said, "Don't worry, Mizuki-sensei. I won't disappoint you this time." With a determined expression and a solid stare like a veteran prepared to sacrifice his life for his duty. Mizuki gestured for Naruto to leave, saying, "I know you won't, Naruto-kun." In Konoha, the night had a full moon. Even with a few clouds, the moon's maximum brilliance was hardly hidden by the sky. This kind of night made infiltration tasks a little more challenging, much like the young redhead who was trying to enter the Hokage Tower at the time. A figure watched his performance from a distance. Hiding in a nearby structure next to the Hokage Tower, Mizuki thought, "Naruto's stealth skills never cease to amaze me. It would be much harder to carry out the plan if it weren't for that." Mizuki wondered at that point when his life started to go wrong. His upbringing as an orphan was similar to those of others in similar circumstances. The only thing that set him apart was himself. Mizuki could clearly recall the instant he became aware of his uniqueness. He was still residing in the orphanage at the age of 6. An older orphan and a younger one got into a brawl for no apparent cause. The younger one was crushed by the older one, who was inherently stronger. That was not unexpected. The elder child's violence was the issue. Even after the younger child lost consciousness, he continued to hit. He needed to be restrained by 2 elderly caregivers. Mizuki recalled the other orphans' horrified expressions. Looks of sympathy for the little boy and anxiety for the larger one. The problem is, none of that affected Mizuki. He saw nothing wrong with what had transpired. The elder one could punch the younger one since he was stronger. It was as simple as that, but he became aware that his style of thinking was the exception after observing how everyone around him responded. And he understood, almost instinctively, that he had to keep his true thoughts to himself. Mizuki developed a persona of a composed, courteous, and nice young man from that point on. This disguise became more and more refined as he grew older, to the point where he had girlfriends like Tsubaki and pals like Iruka. Mizuki had developed into a shinobi who behaved admirably and had a bright future. Until that damn mission happened, that is. A flashback. Mizuki was sent to a patrol operation along the border between Hai no Kuni and Kawa no Kuni around a year and 3 months ago. The mission was scheduled to last 5 days, but things went horribly wrong this time. The squad leader, a Tokubetsu Jonin whose name Mizuki couldn't recall, saw strange activity close to their location on the final day of the patrol and made the decision to look into it. The worst error he could have made was that the squad noticed 3 figures crossing the border as they got closer to the disturbance. It was impossible to recognize the figures because they were completely covered in hooded cloaks. The squad commander gave the order to pursue these suspects after spotting them, but it was short-lived. The strangers soon became aware of the pursuit and came to a stop in a clearing. Without wasting any time, the leader rushed over to them. "You do not have permission to cross the border of Hai no Kuni. Identify yourselves immediately," the team leader said. The strangers responded right away. Before Mizuki could blink, one of the figures pulled out what looked like a bone sword and pierced the leader's heart, killing him before he realized what had occurred. Mizuki's 2 friends attacked after noticing the suspect's animosity, but he knew better. That figure's movements were above the capabilities of mere chunin like them. It would be suicidal to confront him head-on. The most terrifying aspect was that only one of the figures possessed this power, and if Mizuki's intuition was right, the other 2 were as powerful. Mizuki had no choice but to flee. Hopefully, he would be sufficiently distracted by his 2 companions to escape. Unfortunately for him, though, that was not the case. He was going to run when one of the figures emerged behind him and attempted to use a kunai to cut his throat. Mizuki was able to avoid the kunai, whether by chance or destiny, but that just delayed the inevitable. He was aware that a miracle would not occur twice and that he would be killed by the figure's next attack. What would have been his demise was cut off by a voice amid all that tension. "Wait a moment. Arashi-kun and Kimimaro-kun." The person who spoke was the most powerful of the 3, and it was clear from his remarks that he was also the group's leader. Mizuki started searching for a fresh escape route as soon as the threat to his life was temporarily removed. As he did so, he saw that one of the 2 companions who had tried to use the bone sword to fight the figure was already dead, and the other was being held by the hair while the sword was aimed at his throat. This assessment of his surroundings diverted Mizuki's attention, and he didn't realize the putative leader of the Nuke Nins was approaching until he was directly in front of him. The apparition laughed menacingly and said, "Kukakuku, you were already ready to abandon your companions, weren't you?" Mizuki was unsure of how to react to the figure. His response could sentence him to a fate worse than death, as many in the shinobi community take brotherhood very seriously. Mizuki turned to face the person speaking in front of him and said, "You don't need to be scared. I promise that, depending on your answer, I might even spare you." A pair of yellow eyes with slit pupils, resembling those of a snake, were visible beneath the hood. For the first time in his life, Mizuki chose to be himself and give an honest response after realizing that his opponent was looking for a response. He would at least depart from this world as himself, since he was already condemned. Yes, if we all attacked together, we would all end up dead. So, at least let their deaths be useful for my survival, Mizuki said empathetically. When his partner heard this, he became enraged. "Mizuki, you bastard." The figure holding him immediately put an end to this. The leader figure said, "Kukuku, very well. Mizuki-kun, that's your name, isn't it?" Mizuki nodded in agreement. "Mizuki-kun, I have a proposal for you. If you fulfill it, not only will I spare your life, but I will also allow you to serve me. Do you want to hear it?" "I'm all ears." Without having to say it twice, the figure said, "Just kill your companion from Konoha." Mizuki swiftly pulled out a kunai and stabbed his former companion in the throat. When the leader figure saw this, he couldn't help but laugh menacingly. "Kukuku," without any hesitation. "Excellent, Mizuki-kun," the figure applauded. Mizuki swiftly sank to one knee, bowed before the leader figure, and waited for them to speak after fulfilling the request. The figure lifted his hood as he continued, "I think it's time for a presentation on my part." Mizuki was completely taken aback by his appearance. "Am I up against a fucking Sanin? What on earth is he doing here?" "My name is Orochimaru, but from your shock, I think you've already heard of me, Kukuku." Trying not to show his fear, Mizuki said, "How should I serve you, Orochimaru-sama?" Orochimaru's neck stretched to the point where his teeth sank into Mizuki's neck in retaliation, and his body was overcome with agonizing pain. "From now on, you will be my spy in Konoha, and this little gift of mine will ensure that you don't spill the beans," Orochimaru remarked as his neck grew back to its usual length. A sort of black mark that looked like a tiny butterfly developed where the Sanin had bitten. Not that Mizuki could see it at the time. The poor man had fallen to the ground, still screaming in agony and scratching the area of the mark. Orochimaru said, "Now let's go, Kimimaro-kun, Arashi-kun. I expect great things from you, Mizuki-kun. Until we meet again." The end of the flashback. It was awful after that. It was extremely difficult for Mizuki to come up with a convincing narrative to explain both his own survival and the deaths of his friends. To fit the narrative he had written, he spent hours changing the location of the encounter with the snake Sanin. Despite this, he continued to experience pain and a fever as a result of the little gift that his new master had given him. It was easy to persuade his bosses of his claim because of his flawless reputation. The issue was that there were still rules to observe, regardless of how much they trusted him. As a result, Mizuki would be monitored and prohibited from leaving the community for some time. The Chunin found this helpful because his new master had asked him to keep an eye on Uchiha Sasuke and gather information. Mizuki made the decision to apply for the assistant teaching position at the Shinobi Academy in order to accomplish this. It didn't take long for the higher-ups to approve him since they wanted to be able to monitor him until they were certain that his cover tale was accurate. It was more convenient because the job he was looking for wasn't too sensitive. Mizuki was aware that his position was vulnerable in spite of everything. His chances of getting found increased with the length of time he served for Orochimaru. The seal on his neck barred him from even surrendering in the hopes of becoming a double agent. The fact that his new master was completely unreliable was another issue. Mizuki kept thinking, he will discard me as soon as I am no longer useful to him. Mizuki had to find another route out after realizing he couldn't rely on either the village or the Sanin, something he never would have thought of if he weren't in such a dangerous predicament. The plan was straightforward. Take the scroll of seals and flee to the secret villages of Kumo or Iwa. He would never be able to steal and get away alive, though, for the Hokage residence was extremely secure. Before Naruto pulled out one of his well-known practical jokes and vandalized the entire Hokage residence, Mizuki was on the verge of giving up on the idea. Mizuki was unaware of the boy's method, but what mattered was that the redhead accomplished it. If he could do it once, he could do it again. From that point on, all Mizuki had to do to trick the delinquent into taking the scroll of seals was to grow close to him and earn his trust. That's just what Mizuki did for nearly 6 months. It was almost impossible to put up with the brat for the first few days. Mizuki grew increasingly resentful of him due to his rude, gregarious, and, worse, needy demeanor. Mizuki's patience eventually ran out, to the point where he was on the verge of giving up everything in order to murder the brat. But the plan still came first, and Naruto had his part in it. His failure on the genin test was Mizuki's best method of controlling him, and it became an issue when the redhead learned to use Bunshin no Jutsu just 1 month before the final exam. Mizuki didn't believe Naruto when he said he could use Fuinjutsu to deal with his extra chakra. The redhead's scores showed that he lacked the intelligence to even start in that subject, and that painting was infamously challenging. To his astonishment, though, the troublemaker was somehow very proficient in Fuinjutsu. The youngster was able to employ the Bunshin no Jutsu to solve his predicament thanks to his signature seal, Fuinjutsu. Nagale Seigen. Mizuki was compelled to use a genjutsu that interfered with the redhead's ability to manage his chakra. Luckily for him, Naruto was a total moron in all but Fuinjutsu, so the youngster thought he was merely having trouble adjusting to the new quantity of chakra that Nagale Seigen had given him. Mizuki was ready to enjoy the fruits of his scheme today. Before the Bunshin no Jutsu test, he successfully cast the genjutsu on the boy, and Naruto failed as predicted. It was also not hard to persuade him to follow his strategy. The Hokage agreed to give him a makeup test, which involved stealing the sealing scroll and learning one of the jutsus inscribed on it. All he had to do was claim to have spoken with the Hokage. With the sealing scroll in his possession, Naruto was already departing the Hokage tower after falling for it hook, line, and sinker. I just had to let everyone know now. I can kill him and use the false body I made to mimic my own demise once they realize it was the brat who took the scroll. With a sly smirk on his lips, Mizuki thought, perfect, everyone will think Naruto killed me and escaped with the scroll, as he watched the redhead make his way to the forest west of the hamlet. Iruka was lying in bed, thinking about what he had spoken to the Sandame. I understand your feelings, Iruka, but Naruto's actions are merely a reaction to the way he is treated. Many people don't think well of him because of the load he bears, and he responds to that by pulling practical jokes. Iruka, don't expect too much from him because he prefers to be viewed as a troublemaker rather than a demon. It would be an understatement to say that he was astonished by what the ancient Hokage had said. As he had done at a comparable age to the redhead, Iruka had always assumed that Naruto's antics were due to a craving for attention. Maybe because he had always attempted to steer clear of that subject, He had never considered that it was because of the demon the youngster possessed. Iruka was unable to deceive himself. He couldn't help but dislike Naruto when he first began teaching at the academy. The boy was a continual reminder of his misfortune because he represented the reason of his parents' deaths. But that view evolved over time. He gradually lost sight of the fox and started to recognize himself in the redhead. In an effort to discipline the troublemaker and impart valuable lessons he ought to have learned at Naruto's age, he became closer to him as a result. Perhaps all I wanted was to keep him from repeating my mistakes. Knock, knock, knock. Iruka, it's an emergency. He was interrupted by a shout and a knock on the door. That voice. Mizuki? The teacher quickly stood up and walked to the door to investigate the cause of the disturbance. When he answered the door and saw his co-worker Mizuki, Iruka exclaimed, "What is it?" with a frightened expression. Mizuki became extremely upset as he stated, "We need to gather at the Hokage residence." Beads of sweat were visible streaming down his cheeks. It seems that Naruto-kun took the scroll of seals as part of one of his pranks. Iruka's world fell apart upon hearing this. Naruto, screw it. This time, you've gone too far. The two quickly made their way to the Hokage residence. Naruto was breathing heavily. He had been training until he was worn out since arriving at that clearing a few hours prior. He was irritated when he opened the scroll and discovered that the first jutsu was a kind of bunshin jutsu. He nearly skipped to the next one because he didn't like jutsus involving clones, but his obstinacy prevailed. And it was worthwhile. The jutsu he acquired was incredible, and if he applied it properly, becoming Hokage would no longer be a pipe dream. The young redhead heard approaching footsteps, which he immediately recognized, before he could even collect his breath. "Found you, Naruto." "Hey," Iruka exclaimed as she moved to face him. Naruto couldn't help but joke, "Oh, found a bloody nose," to Iruka's dismay. "Idiot. I'm the one who found you," exclaimed the instructor. It would have been difficult for Iruka to resist slapping the boy if she hadn't already grown accustomed to his antics. Iruka started to assess Naruto's condition while huffing at the redhead's actions. The teen had visible tears in his infamous orange jacket, and he was covered in dirt. Was he in training? He. "You found me. I only managed to learn one jutsu," the redhead said, clumsily scratching the back of his head. "Hey, you're all banged up. Don't tell me you were training here?" Iruka said. Naruto exclaimed, "That's right. Now, if I can do a jutsu from the scroll, I can graduate, right?" with excitement. Iruka couldn't help but feel uneasy. "What? Where did you get that idea, Naruto?" she asked. The pieces weren't adding up for some reason. This was meant to be one of Naruto's practical jokes, but now he was discussing graduation. "Mizuki-sensei. He told me that if I learned a jutsu from the scroll and showed it to you, I could graduate." Iruka had a suspicion about what was actually happening after hearing this. If he was correct, they both had to leave right away. The child was about to say, "Look, Iruka-sensei. This was the jutsu I learned," when his teacher and he were hit by a barrage of kunai. Iruka pushed Naruto away to keep him safe. But that came at a great price. Iruka had less time to shelter himself from the kunai aimed at him. All he could do was avert deadly injuries, suffering numerous hits in the process. 2 kunai in each leg, 2 in his right arm, and 3 in his body, which, thankfully, were blocked by his vest. Standing at the edge of the clearing, perched on a limb, sat Mizuki with an expression rarely seen on his face. His eyes were as frigid as winter storms, and a condescending sneer curved on his lips. "Good job finding this place, Iruka," the newcomer muttered, thinking to himself, "Well, change of plans. With Iruka here, the higher-ups will never accept that Naruto killed us both, until he employs the power of the beast. The question now is how to bring the beast out." "So it really was you." Naruto was the most surprised by the whole scenario. Mizuki-sensei, someone he trusted, had just attacked him and Iruka-sensei. What on earth is happening here? Mizuki stated, "Naruto, give me the scroll," with deadly seriousness. "Hey. What's the big idea, Mizuki-sensei? What the hell are you doing?" the redhead said, bewildered by the situation and terrified of the response he may receive. "A lie? That could work. Naruto, rejoice. You won't have to die for me, but you will have to transform into the demon in return." As he observed the entire event, Mizuki thought. Naruto was afraid of this. He was suspicious of the entire scheme to take the scroll of seals, but Mizuki-sensei had told him. He had always trusted his teacher. The redhead couldn't believe that Mizuki was taking advantage of him, despite his gut telling him that something wasn't right. Mizuki grinned mockingly as he asked, Are you sure it's me who's lying, Iruka? Isn't it you and the rest of the village who have lied to Naruto his entire life? Iruka instantly realized what Mizuki was trying to say, which made him even more desperate. There wasn't much he could do to stop it if it was what he dreaded. Shut up, Mizuki, Iruka yelled in a panicked tone. Naruto, you know that 14 years ago, the Kyuubi attacked the village, right? Mizuki asked, but Naruto was unable to understand and could only stare at him. Iruka yelled, I already told you to shut up, Mizuki. With desperation. Blood spurted from his wounds due to his extreme worry. Since that incident, a law was created, a law that everyone knows, except you, Mizuki remarked almost casually. Shut the fuck up. For some reason, the redhead felt compelled to hear what Mizuki had to say. What law? What are you talking about? He said. Mizuki appeared to be having fun when he said, a law that forbids anyone from saying that the fourth Hokage sealed the Kyuubi inside you. You are the demon fox. He even briefly laughed. That's it. I'm a demon to them, which explains all those glances and disdain. Naruto's head was filled with these startled ideas, which quickly turned into rage and despair. He would never be loved and would be destined to live alone indefinitely if, as Mizuki asserted, he was a demon. The redhead's demeanor changed as he started to process this. His brows furrowed more than before, his teeth clenched in a beastly grimace, and a hint of despair and loathing emerged in his gaze. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Iruka became even more worried as his emotions became more erratic and more chakra began to seep out of his body. Well, but it's still insufficient, Mizuki thought frustratedly. I've heard that a Jinchuriki discharges their Biju when they are severely wounded. Naruto, let's put that to the test. Mizuki drew the Fuma shuriken that was tied to his back while keeping this thought in mind. After saying, everyone hates you, no one will ever accept you, Naruto. Mizuki threw the Fuma shuriken at Naruto, who was too shocked to respond. Iruka had no other option when she saw this. It wasn't until he felt a drop of warm blood trickle down his cheek that Naruto snapped back to reality. Why? The redhead could not understand what was happening. Iruka was lying over him, protecting him from the Fuma shuriken that had lodged itself in his back. Naruto. All this pain. This loneliness. You must be suffering greatly too. Iruka's grief and shame caused tears to flow down his face. I'm sorry, Naruto. If I had tried harder, you wouldn't have to feel this way. The small youngster was so stunned by everything that he left as quickly as he could after hearing this. Mizuki did not hesitate to use all of his might to stomp down on Iruka's shin, precisely targeting the area where the kunai he had thrown earlier had pierced. Iruka's shin was brutally bent at a 45-degree angle as a result. It wouldn't be shocking if the bones had entirely shattered rather than just broken. As strange as the leg's posture was, the scene was rendered even more painful by the volume of blood that spurted out. Mizuki's stomping continued unabated as he said, You know, Iruka, I've always wanted to do this to you. Your uptight attitude has always annoyed me. I could kill you quickly, but, since the plan's already gone off the rails, I might as well have some fun. It appeared that the white-haired Chunin would not stop until Iruka's leg was totally destroyed. Oddly, though, Iruka did not scream in agony, which alerted Mizuki and saved him from being cut by one of his own kunai and planted in the body of his old co-worker. However, Iruka swiftly retrieved the Fuma shuriken from his back and tossed it in Mizuki's direction, forcing him to launch himself chest first to the ground in order to escape getting struck. Iruka then leapt back and continued his offensive. Mizuki swiftly sprang up and grabbed another pair of kunai from his holster, ready to strike again, but before he could toss them, the clearing was filled with dense smoke. When he saw this, Mizuki became more vigilant and sharpened his senses in case an attack was about to happen. But that onslaught never happened, and when the smoke cleared, the only thing visible in the clearing was Mizuki's figure. Mizuki was astonished by the dark-haired Chunin's tenacity, saying, To think you could escape even with your leg in that condition. You really are tough, Iruka. I can go after him later. With his leg like that, he won't get far. I need to find Naruto quickly. Fortunately, the brat headed in the opposite direction of the village. Mizuki did not waste any more time and set out to find his former pupil. The hardest times of Naruto's brief life were upon him. There was more to it than just convincing himself that he wasn't a failure and that he wanted to see the faces of people who hated him when he disproved them. He secretly desired acceptance. By demonstrating his strength, he thought the villagers would begin to recognize him for who he really was. However, that suddenly appeared unattainable. All this because of that damned fox sealed inside me. Naruto wasn't ignorant about seals. On the contrary, He took great satisfaction in his ability to understand the subject matter. He was therefore aware that he wasn't the Kyuubi, despite what Mizuki had claimed, and this just made him more enraged. If he had done anything bad, he could tolerate the villagers' anger. In fact, he could even comprehend if he was the son of traitors. However, he was merely a poor child who was sacrificed in order to keep the beast in check. Being despised for a crime he didn't commit. The redhead fled since he was unable to cope with that. Now that he was far from the clearing, the redhead was unsure of what to do. If he went back to the village, he might be killed because Mizuki had tricked him into stealing the scroll of seals, making him no different from a criminal. Those who detested him because of the fox might use this as a chance to murder him. Mizuki-sensei. The juvenile was making an effort not to think about his ex-teacher. The boy had never experienced the agony of betrayal before, and it was obvious that he had no idea how to handle it. Although Naruto had no idea what it was like to have a brother, he wanted to think that if he had, it would be someone similar to Mizuki. This further exacerbated the pain by demonstrating how close the two had become in previous months. Mizuki attempted to murder me in addition to framing him. He would have already perished twice if it weren't for Iruka-sensei. Naruto was also trying not to think about the fact that, after saving his life, Iruka-sensei had left him to face his own destiny. It's possible that his teacher, who had been like a brother to him, is now deceased. His gut churned at the mere thought. Should I return? The redhead pondered, unsure of what to do. He must already be dead, the voice of his own guilt murmured in his head. However, what if he isn't? He despises me, however, why did he rescue my life? The young man's mind was consumed by these thoughts, which left him in a state of constant bewilderment until recollections of all the different encounters he and Iruka had had came flooding back to him. The chases, the reprimands, the jokes, the times they went out to dine at Ichiraku. The redhead was calmed by the thought that his flight might prevent him from ever experiencing those moments again. I must return. I must persuade Mizuki-sensei to put an end to this insanity. He turned back in the way he had come from, thinking. You fool, Mizuki will kill you if you return. His conscience attempted to stop him once more, but this time it was unsuccessful. A shinobi is always willing to put his life in danger, so why shouldn't I do the same to save someone I care about? Before heading back toward the clearing he had left, Naruto gave it one last thought. A person wearing orange attire could be seen leaping between the branches in Konoha's dark forest. If a third party intensified their senses, they might be able to notice the approach of another person pursuing the first. I located him. Any student in the academy would identify the pursuer as Iruka. Iruka said, Naruto, hurry. Give me the scroll. I'll protect it while you escape. Mizuki is right behind us. But Naruto continued to fly. This Naruto, on the other hand, threw himself at his assailant while leaping forward, whirling 360 degrees, and supporting one foot with a branch. The redhead drew a kunai and used all of his bodily weight to stab the Chunin. Iruka had no chance. The strike launched him into the air and sent him rolling for a few meters. The only reason the damage wasn't worse was that Iruka's wound was quite shallow due to the kunai striking her armored vest. Naruto attempted to land more gently after the strike, but for some reason, one of his legs buckled, leading the redhead to roll along the ground as well. He swiftly stood up in an effort to gain an advantage in the battle, but he had misjudged the damage he had received. The child stumbled and eventually sat down with his back against a big tree trunk because he was unable to support his weight on his right leg. Iruka, still on the ground, muttered, "What?" The steely glare in Iruka's eyes at that point would have seemed peculiar to many of his students, but it would be clarified a moment later as a cloud of smoke engulfed what should have been Iruka. Why, Naruto? The voice behind the haze inquired, how did you know I wasn't Iruka? When the smoke cleared, Mizuki's figure with a vicious expression on his face became visible. The Naruto figure laughed briefly and said, hee hee, before being swallowed up by another cloud of smoke. Because I am Iruka, finished the former Naruto, who was now dressed like the person he claimed to be. When Mizuki saw this, he couldn't help but laugh a little, but the deadly sparkle in his eyes didn't go away. Hee, I see, he murmured. He utilized his chakra and a splint to make his leg move. Iruka, you must be in excruciating pain right now, the traitor said, examining the condition of the leg he had shattered. Unbeknownst to them, a certain redhead was observing the two shinobi as they gazed at one another. You know, Iruka, if you hadn't bothered to protect the brat, you might have had a chance to stop me, Mizuki remarked with an infrequent look of inquiry. I just don't understand why. You, more than anyone, have reasons to hate the brat. Yes. Iruka said gravely. The redhead couldn't resist making fun of himself after learning this. I knew it. Iruka spoke before the young guy could finish his sentence, saying, even though he saved my life, deep down he saw me as the fox. I have every reason to hate what Naruto carries, but he and the demon fox are different. Iruka's once somber visage softened into one of brotherly affection. He is the one who never gives up. He is Konoha's #1 prankster. He is my favorite student. He is not the Kyuubi. He is Naruto. The teenager, who had long vowed to never cry again, was unable to handle the feeling and started crying uncontrollably. Mizuki, however, appeared to be practically repulsed by what he had heard. Mizuki pulled another Fuma shuriken from his back and taunted, I understand. Since that's the case, Iruka, be happy to know that I'm not only going to kill your favorite student, I'm going to force the beast out to serve as a distraction for my escape. With a cruel smirk. Too bad you won't be alive to see it, ha ha ha. So that's it, Iruka thought, bracing himself for the inevitable. However, a blur of orange launched a flying kick at the traitor before Mizuki could launch the Fuma shuriken. This was sufficient to alter the throw's direction, causing the Fuma shuriken to sail far from Iruka. Mizuki was taken by surprise, and the kick to his chin was powerful enough to propel him away. Mizuki wasn't sure whether to be pleased or annoyed when he saw who had attacked him. Phew, so you decided to show up, Naruto, he remarked, whistling a little as he stood back up and used the back of his palm to wipe the blood from his lips. That's enough, Mizuki-sensei, exclaimed the redhead. You idiot, why did you come? Run away, Iruka said in a panicked tone. Mizuki said, ha ha ha, I'm glad you decided to join us, Naruto. You saved me the trouble of hunting you down. But his feelings were very different. Shit, shit, shit. It will be hard to provoke him to summon the beast now because he must have heard everything. I'm just going to kill these two and leave, screw everything. If you don't stop this, I'll have to kick your ass until you give up, the redhead threatened, using a hand seal that most shinobi are unaware of. Iruka saw this. Mizuki yelled, go ahead, you demon fox, while executing his own series of hand seals. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Naruto shouted the name of his technique, and hundreds of redheads just like him appeared in the jungle. Both shinobi were astounded by how many clones the boy produced. Naruto. These are actual clones, not just illusions. Given the extent of his student's accomplishment, Iruka couldn't help but think, to learn a high-level ninjutsu like this in just one night. In contrast, Mizuki was desperate and asked, what's happening? A few clones would be manageable for him. But hundreds? He was aware that he had no chance. One of the clones questioned, what's wrong? Weren't you going to finish me off? If you don't want to come to us, then we'll come to you, said a different clone. The beating started at that point. Although Mizuki was able to eliminate a few clones, the sheer quantity was too great for him to manage. He was soon slung to the ground, severely battered, blood seeping from his shattered nose and now toothless mouth. Naruto remarked, hee hee hee. I guess I got a little carried away, as he observed the outcome of his actions. After the battle was complete, the redhead dismissed the clones with a retracted jutsu and turned to check on his teacher. Naruto felt a sharp pain in his chest as he was walking, and Mizuki's image appeared in front of the teenager like a mirage, brandishing a kunai that was now lodged in the redhead's heart. How? Not bad, Naruto, but I'm out of your league, ha ha ha, Mizuki said, grinning twistedly. To think that I had to use Suiman no Kaker because of this worthless brat. When Iruka realized what had happened, she yelled, Naruto, in alarm. Damn, Mizuki has always been skilled in genjutsu, thus he must have used one. How could I have overlooked it? Without even the tiniest concern, Mizuki removed the kunai from the teen's chest. The white-haired Chunin's only chance of escape now was to kill Iruka, flee as soon as possible, and hope that the community took some time to realize he was the cause of all of this. He had already wasted too much time and his plans A and B had failed. Naruto was in a terrible situation. The kid was unable to stand once the kunai was removed from his chest, and his body collapsed to the side, helpless, so that he could watch Mizuki slowly making his way toward his teacher. I suppose I'm truly stupid, believing that I could defeat a far more skilled shinobi simply by learning a new jutsu. Naruto laughed at his own stupidity and thought, what an idiot. I just wanted Iruka-sensei not to pay for my mistakes. The redhead's awareness soon sank into the icy grasp of death as his eyesight darkened. Hey, young one, don't you want to survive? Don't you want to save that teacher of yours? Don't you want to tear the throat out of the one who betrayed you? What? I know you want to, young one. Just accept my power, and you'll be able to destroy your enemies. Naruto had no idea where the voice was coming from or what it wanted, but he did know that he would stop at nothing to make amends for his mistakes right then. So, what's it going to be? I agree, grant me that authority? Very well, young one. Go and make a massacre, kukakuku. Then the voice vanished, and the boy's body started to get extremely hot. Well, Iruka, the kid delayed things a bit, but it's time to kill you, Mizuki said as he stood in front of Iruka, ready to rip his old co-worker's throat. Iruka was preparing to assault Mizuki and transport him to the other world in the meanwhile. However, before they could take any action, they noticed a chakra explosion. Now that he was standing, Naruto's body was surrounded by a red chakra aura that resembled flames. As if that weren't enough, his appearance had also changed. His canines had become actual fangs, his hands' nails had grown into claws, and his face now had 3 thick marks on each cheek that resembled a fox's whiskers. His eyes, which had once been a pair of perfect amethysts, were now red as blood, and his pupils were slits that resembled those of a beast. This was the most noticeable transformation. The redhead appeared wild, almost like a beast or devil, as a result of all these alterations. Naruto remarked in a strangely composed, even playful tone, he. You know, Mizuki-sensei, I'm glad that was an illusion. Just beating you up was far too little for what you really deserve, but his smile belied that. As if that weren't enough, the redhead's genuine intentions were made clear by the intense desire to kill that he subconsciously displayed. It was a feral smile that one would expect to see on a predator. So the beast has come out. Plan B appears to still be in place. It won't be long before reinforcements come following this chakra explosion. Mizuki, unaffected by Naruto's warning, thought, I need to get out of here quickly and hope that the beast distracts the village. Naruto charged at Mizuki with a speed considerably faster than his own before he could react. Despite being taken aback, the white-haired Chunin attempted to use his kunai to strike the teen's throat before he could reach him, but the redhead abruptly stopped moving, as though he had anticipated the traitor's plan. Naruto took advantage of Mizuki's blow, which simply cut through the air. With a small leap, the redhead kicked his former teacher's chin with all force, launching him from their position. Mizuki rolled across the floor but soon stood back up. Damn! My jaw must have been smashed by this. The redhead was already moving in his direction when the shinobi drew multiple shurikens and hurled them at him. I need to buy time to launch the Suiman no Kaker. All the shurikens were easily avoided by the boy, but they were effective in delaying the redhead's advance long enough for Mizuki to do the hand seals required for his Suiman no Kaker. The Chunin released his strongest genjutsu with a whistle. Mizuki turned to start his getaway now that his presence was concealed. I'll use the scroll of seals to get away while you fight against my illusion. All I can hope for is that I don't encounter anyone while traveling. I will be unable to deploy the Suiman no Kaker once more. But the traitor's thoughts were cut off by unbearable pain before he could flee. His injuries were made worse when he looked down and realized that a hand had punctured his torso. The hand was swiftly removed from his body. Now on his knees, Mizuki's fractured jaw allowed him to only moan. When he turned to face his executioner, he saw that it was Naruto, who was grinning sadistically and enjoying his victim's agony. Ha 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 ha. This is for trying to kill Iruka-sensei. Naruto, with a psychotic expression, charged the traitor and started ruthlessly tearing at his skin and flesh with his claws. And this is for deceiving me, you bastard. Ha 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 ha. The woodland resounded with an insane laugh. The redhead's body and the surroundings were now covered with pieces of flesh and intestines, but the attack showed no signs of abating. In anything, Naruto appeared even more anxious to mutilate his old teacher's corpse. The teenager had to turn to see who dared to ruin his fun when one of the hands that was about to strike again was abruptly stopped. Naruto, that's enough. Iruka-sensei. Iruka had seen it all. The teacher was relieved to see his student, whom he believed to be dead, but the boy's following behavior only made him more concerned, so he had to drag his wounded body in the direction of the redhead in order to stop him. Naruto halted as soon as he saw his teacher. When he saw the worry, and particularly the terror, in Iruka's eyes, all the exhilaration and resentment that had clouded his thoughts disappeared. The boy's face quickly became filled with fear and embarrassment, and he made a last-ditch effort to repent, saying, Iruka-sensei, I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me. Upon witnessing his pupil's condition, Iruka immediately embraced him in an attempt to console him. In the most composed voice he could muster, he murmured, It's okay, Naruto. It's okay. Now overcome with remorse, the kid started to experience chest pain once more. He looked down and noticed that Mizuki's wound was still there, with a lot of blood already poured. The redhead lost consciousness as a result of this, the emotional state, and the weariness from using whatever that chakra had been. Iruka frantically yelled, "Naruto? Hang in there, Naruto, I won't let you die," in an attempt to keep the adolescent aware. 4 creatures with animal masks landed silently where the teacher and pupil were. "Anbu, quickly, you need to take Naruto to the hospital," Iruka said as fast as he could after spotting the 4 figures. "Calm yourself, Chunin Amino. We'll take both of you to the hospital, so don't worry," stated the person who seemed to be the squad leader and had long purple hair and a cat mask. The leader approached what was left of Mizuki's corpse and sealed it into a scroll, saying, "Kuma, Tora, take Chunin Amino and Naruto to the hospital. Ushi, retrieve the scroll of seals. You and I will report the situation to Hokage-sama." Before they all left, the leader had one last thought. Hokage-sama won't be pleased at all with what happened here. Over Konoha, the moon was already high in the sky. The entire town, including the Hokage's office, was bathed in its brilliance because there were no clouds. Normally, the location would be deserted at this hour, but for the last 3 days, the Sandaime Hokage had been there, working late into the night to address the fallout from the so-called traitorous teacher event. The smoke from the Hokage's pipe hung in the air, mingling with the weight of the choices he had to make as his weary eyes studied the reports strewn across his desk. Dealing with the enraged clan leaders was his first challenge. Protesters raised their voices at the meetings, calling for explanations for the ridiculousness of allowing a traitor to teach at the Shinobi Academy. Hiruzen thought, as if they were the only ones upset about this. The incident infuriated him more than anyone else. He didn't have to personally designate each shinobi to a certain role because the village bureaucracy operated in this manner. He simply appointed the leaders of the various sections, who then dispersed the shinobi as they thought fit. But Hiruzen was deeply irritated to learn that Chi Bukayu, the Shinobi Academy's director, whom he had known for a long time, had hired Mizuki as an assistant instructor without thoroughly investigating his background. In an attempt to defend himself, Bukayu said that the torture and interrogation department had told him that Mizuki was clean and that it would be best to put him in a position where he could be watched. But this justification was insufficient to clear him of accountability. When he learned that the Hokage had already decided, his face became white. He continued to try to argue, but the elderly man's unwavering gaze made it obvious that he could not be persuaded to change his mind. Bukayu realized that he had lost the village leader's trust as well as his job when he left the office. The tea department did not escape punishment as a result. The Hokage made careful to tell them that their carelessness had not gone undetected. It was just a matter of time until the sentence was decided. In addition to punishing Bukayu, this move was more than sufficient to allay the clan leader's displeasure. Above all, a Hokage was a politician, and maintaining everyone's satisfaction was essential to the village's cohesiveness. For the town to remain stable, it was essential to handle valid complaints, promote good work, and punish failures. A clan's members may develop more radical beliefs and launch an uprising if they feel insulted. Like what nearly happened during that incident, Hiruzen thought regretfully. With a soft sigh, the elderly Hokage gently got up from his seat, his body bearing the weight of his years. He took a drag from his pipe and let the smoke float into the night air as he made his way to the window that provided a broad view of the hamlet. But his thoughts were elsewhere. He had just finished reading the report, and it raised a fresh worry for him. A seal discovered after Mizuki's autopsy was the Fuinjutsu, Habi no Shita, a seal all too familiar to the Sandaime. During the previous Great Ninja War, shinobi dispatched on infiltration operations frequently utilized this seal. Its ability to self-destruct as soon as the bearer passed away and its tremendous difficulty in detection were its primary characteristics. Furthermore, the seal prohibited the person who was marked from discussing specific subjects that were specified by the person who applied it. They would have terrible headaches if they tried to resist it, and they would ultimately perish if they persevered. For one straightforward reason, Hiruzen was aware of all these details. Orochimaru, his pupil, was the one who made the seal. Furthermore, the possibility that he had marked Mizuki himself was not out of the question. It was rather fortunate to find this Fuinjutsu. The autopsy team claimed that a portion of the Kyuubi's chakra had seeped into the seal, interfering with its operation and keeping it from totally destroying itself. The Hokage was now positive that his former pupil had eyes and ears throughout the hamlet because of this coincidental event. To find out who else was associated with the serpent, a comprehensive inquiry would be required. That returned the issue to Mizuki. With someone like him, what could Orochimaru possibly want? As he looked out the window at the village, the elderly man wondered and let out a puff of smoke. Hiruzen had already met with his Jonin commander in an attempt to ascertain the Habi-Sanin's genuine motivations. They came to the conclusion that Orochimaru was interested in one of the great clan's heirs, more precisely, either the Hyuga heiress or the Uchiha heir, after examining Mizuki's actions during the previous few months. But the Sandame's gut told him that the Uchiha was the one who attracted the attention of his former pupil. This was already a major issue in and of itself. The final faithful Uchiha, who had adopted the name Sasuke, had his own situation. Hiruzen couldn't just confine him to the village and wait for him to start a new clan. However, it was impossible to let the Sharingan end up in the hands of the treacherous Sannin. His resolve to designate Kakashi as Sasuke's sensei was only strengthened by this worry. In addition to ensuring the young heir's protection, the seasoned Jonin may teach him how to master his bloodline, which is crucial for the Uchiha clans and the village's future. And this led him to Naruto, another pupil he was thinking of giving to Kakashi and who was currently his biggest worry. The redhead was without a doubt this incident's biggest casualty. According to the medical nin's report, his injuries were the worst, and his survival was a miracle. However, the elderly man was more knowledgeable. The heritage that raced through his blood was, if anything, the reason his surrogate grandchild survived. I would be held accountable for his near-death experience. The Sandame had made numerous mistakes with Naruto, and this would just be one more. Removing the little child's opportunity to grow up with his family was the Hokage's first and most grave error. Hiruzen was too late. His wife and successor had already passed away, leaving their children behind and depriving the Sandame of the chance to give his life as he ought to have. He had to make yet another tough choice following this catastrophe. Above all, a Jinchuriki was a weapon, and Konoha, still weak from the Kyuubi's invasion, could not afford to lose one. Luckily, the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki had always acted as a deterrent. His very presence was sufficient to do so. This prevented Hiruzen from raising Naruto only as a weapon of war, which he wished to avoid at all costs. Given this, the Sandame Hokage's best course of action was to conceal his identity. He suppressed any details that might have connected him to his parents and merely told the council that there was a new Jinchuriki. It would just take a little logic for people to realize that the boy was the beast's container if he were acknowledged as their son. Furthermore, his ancestry would draw hostile adversaries or, worse, those who would attempt to steal it for themselves. Much like what nearly occurred with his mother. As a result, the Hokage himself gave the redhead the name Naruto and put him in the village orphanage. The old Hokage held to the idea that although an orphan's childhood was never pleasant, it was far better than it could have been. Until the boy becomes 5, at least. On that day, a rumor that Naruto was the Kyuubi's container started to go like wildfire. The Sandame made every effort to quell these rumors, but even enacting a law that made speculating about the identity of the Jinchuriki punishable by death was insufficient. Over time, things got so bad that Naruto was finally expelled from the orphanage. What's the worst? It wasn't until 3 months later that Hiruzen discovered the youngster was homeless. The consequences were obviously severe. The Kami no Shinobi, who discouraged many from attempting any action against the youngster, was furious with everyone who did it. After that, the elderly man made every effort to compensate Naruto by giving him an apartment, clothing, shinobi gear, and a monthly stipend. Naturally, the remainder of the redhead's childhood was anything from perfect. Many continued to believe that Naruto was the Jinchuriki despite the elder's refusal to acknowledge his true identity, and he was treated coldly at best. In order to deal with this, Naruto started frightening the populace with his practical jokes, which only got worse after the boy failed the academy's final exam for the first time. Another one of my errors, he thought. The old man recognized the issue as soon as he heard about the failure, but he found it advantageous that Naruto had not yet received his diploma. To his own regret, he abandoned him in the academy for 3 arduous years, squandering the boy's enormous potential. However, this was about to change. He intended to make sure Naruto would pass this test. He even went to the academy to talk to Bukayu and Iruka about it. Everything was on the verge of being resolved, but Mizuki caused it all to fall apart. The elder Hokage had engaged in multiple narrative conflicts since the occurrence. The first was to ensure that Naruto was perceived as a victim rather than an accomplice of Chunin, the traitor. He was able to prevail in this war, but the other was far more difficult. The word that Naruto had utilized the demon fox's chakra could not be stopped, despite his influence. The demonic chakra was felt by too many people to be disregarded. The old man had no alternative but to quietly spread the word that the redhead was a pseudo-Jinchuriki who had unintentionally absorbed some of the fox's chakra during the event 14 years prior. But unlike other Jinchuriki, This small quantity of chakra did not pose a threat. I just hope that Naruto's treatment by the village doesn't get worse. After finishing his pipe, the elderly guy went back to the table and picked up the day's final report, which coincidentally had to do with Naruto. The offender would awaken the next morning, according to the statement. The elderly man had been most afraid of this moment lately. The old guy sighed and thought, I've seen better men succumb to traumas like what Naruto endured. I just hope I can lessen some of the suffering he's going through. Tick-tack. Tick-tack. The only sounds in that silent hospital room were the sound of the clock and a gentle breath. Lying on his bed, Naruto gazed absently at the room's white ceiling. He had been awake for almost 30 minutes. The redhead's body was overcome with panic as soon as he opened his eyes. Fortunately, the attending physician was able to reassure him by outlining his circumstances, including how long he had been there, how he would soon be released, and, lastly, how Iruka was. Now that those questions had been addressed, the redhead's only option was to lie there while the night's events replayed themselves in his thoughts like a curse. Before long, a chilly feeling started to round his neck, as though a rope of chilly air was encircling him. The sound of footsteps followed. When Naruto lightly touched his neck, nothing was there. The sense of suffocation increased as the footsteps grew closer. The adolescent, attempting to conceal his uneasiness, turned to face the intruder when the door opened. His thoughts briefly felt secure when he recognized the ancient Hokage, but it was quickly overtaken by his uneasiness, which made him turn back to the ceiling. Hiruzen said, "How are you feeling, Naruto?" The room fell silent once more. The redhead rubbed his neck, seemingly lost in his own thoughts. The young man finally spoke, his voice raspy, after what seemed like an eternity. "Hokage Gigi. Am I a monster?" The question caught the third Hokage off guard, and it took him a few moments to decide what to say. The elderly guy said, "You are not a monster, Naruto. The Kyuubi was sealed inside you by the Yondaime Hokage. You are the one who prevents the fox from causing more destruction. You are a hero, Naruto." The youngster turned to face the Hokage and murmured, I cared about Mizuki-sensei, and yet I enjoyed every second of it." The elderly guy briefly averted his gaze and let out a sigh, thinking to himself, so this is what it's about. Naruto. In this world, feeling anger towards an injustice is natural for everyone, just as it's natural to feel satisfaction when justice is done. The elderly man approached his surrogate grandson cautiously, bending down to meet his eyes. Our dilemma is knowing how to identify injustices. Mizuki manipulated you into committing a crime, tried to kill you, and tried to kill someone you cared about. There is no greater injustice in his actions, Naruto. The redhead's hesitation was still visible in the Hokage's eyes, so he raised his left palm to their faces in an attempt to reassure him. The being sealed inside you will amplify those feelings, your anger, your hatred, your sadness, all to manipulate you, so that thing can escape from its prison. That's why I need you to be strong, Naruto, to keep your emotions in check and not fall into the temptation the Kyuubi will offer you. I, more than anyone, know you can. As the Hokage spoke, another odd feeling spread across Naruto's skin, and the chilly wind surrounding the redhead's neck vanished as if it had never been. The small boy's forehead felt something like the warmth that comes only from the morning sun. Despite the flurry of emotions he was experiencing, the redhead was able to process everything the old man had spoken and find some solace because of this feeling. Naruto responded, "Thank you, Hokage Gigi," and a tiny smile appeared on his face. The old man then grinned back. "So, how are you feeling, Naruto?" The Hokage asked again in a lighthearted manner after releasing the young man's hand. In an attempt to arrange his thoughts, the delinquent closed his eyes. The redhead turned away and said, I don't know. There are so many things. How is Iruka-sensei?" "He'll recover well, Naruto, you don't need to worry," the elderly man sighed. He noted the redhead's clumsy attempt to shift the topic. "If there's something else troubling you, Naruto, you can tell me. I'll try to resolve it as best I can." The boy swallowed hard and looked at the Hokage once more. Why did the Yondaime choose me? Why was I the one who had the Kyuubi sealed inside me?" The ancient Sarutobi had to avert his gaze this time. The old man strolled carefully to the room's window, lowering the tip of his hat a little. "The Yondaime was my student's student. I knew his character and integrity, and I can say he was one of the best men I've ever had the pleasure of calling a comrade in arms. I don't know why he chose you, Naruto, but I'm sure he trusted that you would be able to handle the burden he imposed on you." The redhead started to lose the cozy warmth he had been experiencing during this speech, and the feeling of cold on his neck came back with a vengeance that nearly choked him. Naruto had to wait a few moments before he could speak, and even then, all he could say was a quiet, "I understand." "Before I go, I have good news for you." With his hands in his pockets, the Sandaime turned to face the small boy, and Naruto was taken aback by what the Hokage now held. "Congratulations, Naruto, you're officially a shinobi of Konoha," the elderly man remarked, giving the redhead a Konoha hite wrapped in a black cloth. "I." The child started, but the Hokage cut him off before he could say anything more. The elderly man tied the headband on his surrogate grandson's forehead as he spoke, saying, "It's good that you're aware that you made a mistake, Naruto, but you need to learn from it and not let it stop you from moving forward." The elder rubbed the young boy's hair and concluded, "You could have continued believing in Mizuki, or worse, run away, abandoning Iruka. But no, you came back, risking your life to defend a fellow shinobi. You deserve this headband, Naruto. Never let anyone tell you otherwise," to which the boy could only nod. "Well, I have to go now. Remember, once you're released, you need to bring me a photo along with your paperwork to start your registration. I'll be waiting for you, my boy." The elderly guy then departed, leaving Naruto alone with his thoughts. The boy had been dreaming for years of becoming a shinobi and being able to wear the headband with the village insignia on his forehead with pride. And now that it had really occurred, all he could think about was, "Do I have what it takes to be a shinobi?" He was sprinting through a pitch-black jungle that was inaccessible to the moonlight. He had no idea what he was fleeing. His sole thought was that he had to get away. A very recognizable voice asked, "Where do you think you're going, Naruto?" But the redhead dared not turn around. "You think you can escape after what you've done?" The young boy made an effort to ignore the voice, but he was unable to concentrate on anything due to the plethora of sensations that were spreading across his skin. He was destined for this diversion, and before long, the child stumbled over a root he had overlooked and sprawled onto the ground. Naruto made a hasty attempt to stand up, but it was too late. He already had his assailant in front of him. Half of Mizuki's face was as pale as his hair, and the other half was a mixture of rotten flesh and necrotic skin, making him entirely unrecognizable. A rush of nausea swelled in his throat at the sight of his former teacher's condition, and he had to work very hard not to throw up. "Oh, my appearance bothers you, Naruto? Funny, considering it was you who made me look like this, you monster." The traitor then lunged at the redhead while brandishing a big shuriken. As the criminal closed his eyes and waited for the inevitable, he felt icy drips of blood trickle down his cheeks. He opened his eyes, but the situation remained vague and much more perplexing. Mizuki was crying uncontrollably in disbelief as Naruto was on top of him, his fist piercing the traitor's chest severely. The traitor soon had a crooked smile on his face as he said, "Cough. Cough. After everything. You still keep torturing me. To do this to me. You are truly a monster." "No, I didn't want to do this," Naruto muttered repeatedly as he attempted to pull away in despair. However, the redhead suddenly ran into someone behind him. He turned and saw that Iruka was staring at him with a profound sense of disappointment. A crowd started to gather in the clearing before the boy could do anything. Numerous well-known faces, including Ichiraku's, were visible among them. Screams like, "Monster!" and "Damned fox!" filled the audience almost instantly, and Naruto was only able to curl into a ball in an attempt to drown out the cries. Naruto was too astonished by everything going on around him to notice when Mizuki's lifeless form suddenly rose and started to slowly approach. "I took you off the streets, gave you a place to live, clothes to wear, and food to satisfy your hunger, hoping you'd become a splendid shinobi, but..." Mizuki's face started to resemble the third Hokage as she spoke. "In the end, your demonic nature proved stronger. I can't allow you to walk free in this world. Goodbye, Naruto." The redhead's vision became dark as the elderly man finished speaking, releasing the scream that had been imprisoned in his throat. It took Naruto a few moments, breathing heavily, to realize that it had all been a nightmare. Once more. The redhead saw his alarm clock and thought, "At least today I managed to sleep until 5 a.m. The young man wasted no time in going to the restroom to shower and get rid of the chilly perspiration that was all over his body. A frown formed on his face as he gazed at himself in the mirror. His face had been imprinted with 6 lines, 3 on each side, like fox whiskers, ever since that night. These scars served as evidence that he will never be the same. The young man seated in front of the elderly man asked him, clearly unhappy, "Are you sure you want to take the photo like this, kid? I don't want to have to do this again," as he set up the basic photographic gear. "Just take the damn picture, old man," Naruto said without emotion. As he prepared to perform his duties, the elderly man sighed in frustration. The picture was captured with a click. Done, kid, now get out of here, the elderly guy said, giving the young man his finished product. The young man quickly snatched up the picture. Naruto lamented as he took a moment to study the individual in the picture. He was visibly exhausted from his restless nights, as evidenced by the recently shot picture, which showed heavy circles under his eyes. The redhead sighed slightly, put the picture in his pocket, and started to walk away. The criminal made sure to cover his head with the hood of his brand new orange jacket before venturing out into the streets. Naruto no longer wished to attract the attention of a crowd, unlike in the past. Naruto had been dealing with an odd issue ever since he woke up. Several strange sensations were crawling across his skin. The child initially believed it to be an impression, but after nearly passing out while navigating the throng, he was certain it was genuine. The redhead speculated that he could be able to sense both the emotional condition and the existence of living things through his skin. If Naruto weren't viewed with contempt by the majority of the people, this may appear like something amazing. It was far worse to actually experience fear and hatred than to just be looked at with contempt. However, he was still unfamiliar with all of this. The redhead was still unsure of the significance of each feeling. For the time being, the most noticeable was the constant scorching that he experienced whenever a villager recognized him when he was moving through Konoha's streets. It felt like lava was flowing down his skin. This feeling was perceived by Naruto as hatred. However, that was only one of the numerous feelings that now plagued Naruto. He had no control over it, so all he could do was try to put up with it in the hopes that it would eventually become more bearable. It might even be a helpful tool. The young man's only way to deal with this was to try to avoid being seen most of the time because the sensation was even more intense when it was aimed at him. For this, his new jacket came in rather handy. When he was released from the hospital, the old Hokage made sure to give him a new one because his old one had been destroyed that evening. Like the last jacket, this one was mostly orange, but it included black accents on the hood, cuffs, and lower portion, which allowed the redhead to move around unnoticed. Naruto reached the Hokage's tower in this manner. Sarutobi welcomed him into his office as soon as he entered. The redhead was known to have virtually unrestricted access to the tower. Sarutobi smiled and said, "Oh, Naruto, I was expecting you," to his surrogate grandchild. "I hope you brought the photo for your registration." Naruto met the elder's eyes and did his best to conceal his discomfort. When he had to deal with the Sandaime, this became a major issue because he seemed to be even more sensitive to emotions in those he was emotionally close to. The majority of the time, he felt pleasant feelings on his skin, such as a refreshing spring wind or comfortable warmth. However, his substitute grandfather's attention would occasionally shift. Naruto was still unable to identify what it was, but every time it occurred, he would feel a sharpness around his neck, as if a rope were choking him. The delinquent decided not to disclose this skill to anyone because of this. Their faith was fragile because of this and the fact that the Hokage had already lied about the Kyuubi. The young man was unsure if he could still rely on the elderly man. In the worst of his nightmares, Sarutobi might believe that this ability was actually the fox taking control of his soul, and Naruto didn't even want to consider the actions the Sandaime would take in that scenario. "Of course, Gigi. Here you go," Naruto said, forcing his well-known fox-like smile in an attempt to hide his inner turmoil. The Sandaime's eyes brightened somewhat with grief upon seeing the picture. "He truly resembles you. Everyone would be aware of his heritage if it weren't for his red hair and these marks on his cheeks." Sarutobi could not help but notice the young guy in front of him was slightly uncomfortable, a condition that had become quite typical since the tragedy. Although the old guy was still unsure of the cause of this behavior, he prayed it would pass quickly. "Well, Naruto, you surprised me," the elderly shinobi said. "I expected you to bring something ridiculous, but this photo is quite decent. I just missed your Hite 8. Why aren't you wearing it?" he replied with a witty grin. The delinquent said haughtily, "I was afraid of getting it dirty, that's all. And who do you think I am? Huh, Gigi? I'm a shinobi now, seriousness is my last name," in response. The child looked aside guiltily at the old man's rhetorical inquiry. "In that case, I hope you went to have a chat with Inoichi, like I told you." Sigh. It's a standard procedure that all shinobi go through after a complicated mission. The Sandaime paused to give the young man time to process his words. Remember that a shinobi needs to take care of both his body and his mind. This consultation is to ensure that your mind is healthy. Embarrassed, the redhead could only look at the ground. "All right, I'll go to that stupid consultation." The elderly guy considered adding a few more words, but any plans he might have had were cut short by a loud noise. The cause of the disturbance, a young boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years, caught everyone's attention in the workplace. After slamming the door open, the youngster quickly sprinted for the sandaime brandishing a shuriken. However, the young child stumbled over his absurdly long scarf and fell face first to the ground before his attack could be successful. The elderly guy sighed at the spectacle, saying, "SSSHH. Stubbornness may not have been the best trait my grandchild could have inherited from me. This week alone, it's his 7th attack. Damn it. Who set a trap here?" the young child said, rising from the ground and placing his palms on his still red face from the fall. "Are you all right, honorable grandson?" inquired a fresh voice. "I don't see any traps here." Who is this brat? As he saw the strange scene, Naruto thought. The young boy caught the redhead's attention. The child rushed over to Naruto as soon as he saw him. "Go on, admit it, you knocked me down, didn't you?" the young child yelled, pointing a finger at him. Naruto shouted, "TCH, you just tripped over that ridiculous scarf, idiot," while grabbing the boy by the shirt collar. The redhead would normally have been more patient, but his sensitivity was on edge because of how strongly he could feel emotions. "Hey, take your hands off him immediately. You're holding the Sandaime Hokage's grandson," exclaimed the newly arrived senior shinobi. Naruto's annoyance only increased. The criminal could see the shinobi's contempt even through his sunglasses. It felt like a layer of dirt trickling down his body. Naruto's mind quickly digested what the shinobi had said, and he began to wonder whether it could be true as he gazed at the young child he was holding. Although the boy's eyes and features were strikingly similar, it was difficult to accept that he was connected to the village's most powerful shinobi given his childhood and the fact that he still lacked all of his teeth. Humph, he's just like all the others, the young child thought to himself, believing that his protector's intervention had been successful. He won't do anything now that he knows who my grandfather is. With a smug look, the youngster asked, "So, aren't you going to hit me? Or are you scared of my grandpa?" But Naruto didn't respond well. He started to feel something new, like an annoying itch in his ear. He soon came to the conclusion that the boy's tone of voice could only be a depiction of the haughtiness he was projecting. When the redhead's rage peaked, he punched the tiny brat in the forehead without hesitation. "You think I give a damn, moron?" the redhead puffed out in exasperation. Shocked and anxious, the senior shinobi yelled, "What?" Naruto didn't waste any time and turned to face the sandaime without turning around. The delinquent, obviously impatient and eager to get away, inquired, "Do you need anything else, Gigi?" "No, Naruto. You're dismissed. Oh, and don't forget to see Inoichi afterward." The redhead hastily pulled up his hood and left the office after saying, all right, I got it." He was blind to the young boy's intense stare as he turned to leave. A warm glow emanated from the sun that was already rising in the sky, and a new breeze dispersed the tree leaves. For a winter day, the weather was unusual, but this year the cold had given way to a more comfortable temperature. Naruto traveled to the Shinobi Academy during this nice weather. The redhead thought back on his week as he traveled. He could now concentrate on training because his injuries had completely healed. And he enjoyed doing it. He had developed the habit of exhausting his body to the point of near unconsciousness as a coping mechanism for the regular dreams that plagued him. Developing his abilities was, of course, the most crucial thing. The Mizuki event had been a wake-up call for the delinquent, who was now much more conscious of the risks he would face going forward and how unprepared he still was. "I nearly passed away. Iruka-sensei and I would both be dead if it weren't for the fox. I might not survive the next time if I'm not stronger." This idea was on his mind all the time and served as motivation for his rigorous training. It was obvious that what could be accomplished in a week was limited. Compared to his classmates who had graduated that year, Naruto wasn't entirely defenseless. However, he was clearly lagging behind others his age. After all, spending an additional 2 years in the school had left him with potentially irreversible developmental damage. Or at least that was the delinquent's fear. The redhead was so preoccupied with these ideas that he hardly recognized he was in the classroom. It wasn't until a classmate prodded him that he discovered this. He said, shocked. "Finally back on Earth, Naruto. What are you doing here, anyway?" That child wasn't the only one who was interested in the redhead. A sizable portion of the class was likewise interested, and when the delinquent was finally questioned, everyone's focus shifted to him. That raised the question of his sensory capacity once more. Finding a technique to disable this talent was what the redhead had attempted to concentrate on during the training week. His goal was to take command of it as quickly as possible. Sadly, he didn't succeed. Even worse, it appeared that he could increase the sensitivity of this perception if he so desired. The only benefit was that he was more used to handling it. It was uncomfortable, but the feeling of nearly passing out was no longer a real danger. With the hite knotted loosely around his neck, the redhead replied haughtily, "See this, Shikamaru?" Another scornful voice asked, "Who'd you steal this from, dead last?" "Humph. I should break your nose just for suggesting that, dog breath," the redhead shot out, looking annoyed. "So, how did you get this? As far as I know, there's no makeup test, and what are those marks on your face?" Shikamaru asked the delinquent before the other guy could respond. Naruto could only reply, averting his gaze, "It's complicated, but if you're so suspicious, just ask Iruka-sensei when he gets here." Shikamaru shrugged and took a seat farther away, realizing that getting more information from the redhead would be more effort than it was worth. "Praaa. I arrived first." Two girls rushed into the room at that loud noise. Naruto sighed inwardly as he looked at them, thinking, "Here they come." The redhead had encountered many different types of individuals throughout his time in the academy, but the fangirls were unquestionably the most obnoxious. In particular, the most obnoxious person was Haruno Sakura. Naruto was captivated by her beauty when he first saw her, but as soon as she spoke, he became disinterested in the younger female. Her approach toward everyone who wasn't the object of her adoration was the fundamental reason, not merely that he was already interested in someone else. "I'm glad she's not my age." The redhead trembled at the thought. "I definitely would have fallen for her if I had spent the early years of the academy with her." The girl in question walked over to Naruto's seat while he was deep in contemplation. As was to be expected, her appearance revealed a developing beauty. Anyone who saw her would be able to tell that she will grow into a beautiful woman despite her advanced age. Her delicate features, large emerald green eyes, long hair, and color reminiscent of cherry blossoms would ensure that she will look stunning in the future. Her big forehead, which could not be covered with one hand, was her only weakness. The girl said, "Hey, Naruto, move out of the way. I want to sit next to Sasuke-kun," to the redhead's annoyance. I should tell her to get lost, but... The redhead looked sideways at the notorious Sasuke and thought, seeing her annoy Teme is so much more fun. "Of course, Sakura, make yourself comfortable," Naruto said, grinning a little sadistically as he cleared Sakura's path. "Hey, move over, forehead. I got here first," the blonde girl who had come with Sakura grumbled. Sakura responded by sticking out her tongue. Naruto couldn't contain his laughter as he watched the entire scene. Not because of the two girls, but rather because Sasuke was wriggling while attempting to keep his composure. Even if it was foolish, Naruto didn't find it particularly novel. He had observed other descendants of prominent clans, and they all appeared to be stubborn. It was the same with Sasuke, a member of the fabled Uchiha clan. Conversely, it felt much more obvious with him because he was usually frowning, arrogant, and, most infuriating of all, refusing to concede defeat. The redhead disliked him because of this kind of behavior, and after their first sparring session, it became reciprocated. Naruto had spent an additional year in the academy, yet the redhead was still proficient in taijutsu. During the years he repeated, this grew even more apparent. In this final year, the age gap added to his already great strength. It was shocking for Sasuke, who had started his last year as the top student in his class, to have a delinquent who had failed twice break his nose. As a result, the two developed a sort of competition. Despite his infrequent attendance at courses, Naruto made an effort to attend the taijutsu spars. Like I would pass up the opportunity to smash his haughty nose. In the meantime, Sasuke was relieved to take on a stronger opponent, despite his denials. The redhead's challenge was essential to his development during the past 12 months. It was safe to say that they knew each other better than anybody else in their class as a result of all of this. Perceiving each other's emotional shifts is more important than knowing things like favorite colors or foods. Sasuke's visage didn't show any emotion to most of the just graduated students in the room, but to the redhead, it was obvious how disturbed he was by the two girls vying for his attention. Giahahaha. That face is so precious. Naruto was unable to comprehend the cause of all the agony. Most of the people in the room had previously learned about the other sex, even if they were all rather young. Many of the lads present dreamed of being in Sasuke's shoes, being courted by the two most attractive girls in the class. Naruto repeatedly questioned whether Sasuke was a member of the opposing squad as a result. This topic was further compounded by the Uchiha heir's presence. The youngster had short, straight black hair with two strands framing his face, but what attracted attention was his androgynous appearance, which led people to mistake him for a girl. a mistake Naruto had even made when he first saw him. Arg! My stomach turns just thinking about it. Sasuke was aware of all the attention Naruto was paying to his tragedy. Naruto couldn't contain his laughing as soon as he knew and made sure to give the redhead a grumpy face. Giahahahahahahaha. This is hilarious. Which just made Uchiha more irritated, causing his eyebrow to quiver. But the redhead abruptly stopped laughing before he could do anything. As it happens, the redhead's body was overcome by a very familiar feeling. While attempting to deactivate his sensory abilities during that week, he began to realize that the sensation was not only connected to the emotion a person was experiencing, but also had a sort of signature. It was difficult to describe, but in some way, the sensations were both similar and distinct. This made it possible for him to recognize individuals based on those feelings. As a result, he sensed Iruka-sensei's attitude to the classroom. Iruka entered the classroom in no more than 30 seconds. He had no obvious wounds, but anyone watching could see that his steps were dragging a little. Something that made Naruto feel bad. Iruka exclaimed, "Good morning, class. Today is a big day for all of you, so go to your seats right away," in a lighthearted manner that contrasted with his often somber manner. His gaze was filled with a wide range of emotions as he examined each of his pupils, particularly when he momentarily focused on a particular redhead. Today marks the end of your days as students and the beginning of your lives as shinobi. But don't be fooled. This is just the first step on a long path you'll walk from now on. Iruka took a little break from his speech to observe the kids and wait for them to take his remarks seriously. A difficult path, which will require a lot of sacrifice and, at times, will make you think about giving up. But know that this path is worth much more than prestige or money. It is worth everything around you. Your classmates, your future team members, your senseis, and even your families. This path represents the defense of everyone in the village. It is the will that burns like fire in our hearts to protect everything we call home, and that is priceless. Iruka turned to face his pupils again and was happy to see the glitter in their eyes, the sparkle he wanted to kindle. Always remember what I said. In the worst moments, it will be this that keeps you standing and leads you to victory, understood? Hi, Iruka-sensei. With the odd exception of Naruto, who just stared blankly at the floor, the classroom was filled with a chorus of comments, most of which were obviously heartfelt. Well, with that said, let's move on to the next item. As you all know, starting today, you are all genins. What many of you might not know is that you will be divided into teams of 3 members, and each of these teams will be assigned a jonin as their leader and sensei. So, pay attention while I announce each assigned team. Teams. All I can hope is that Sakura and Kiba are not on the same team as me. Dealing with those two was always annoying, but now that you have this awful ability, it's intolerable, the redhead thought. Not Sakura or Kiba, not Sakura or Kiba, not Sakura or Kiba, was repeated like a chant in the delinquent's head as the teams were revealed. Team 7. Naruto. The redhead's inner prayers became louder when Iruka called his name. Not Kiba or Sakura, Haruno Sakura, no way. The redhead clutched his head in pain and let out a mental scream. And Uchiha Sasuke. Yeah, the girl said, shamelessly, and the raven next to her was forced to bow his head. Ahem. Iruka cleared his throat, gave Sakura a sour glance, and went on, your sensei will be Hitaki Kakashi. Sasuke and Sakura, huh? As he glanced at his 2 comrades, Naruto thought to himself, I guess I'll have to settle for that. These are all the teams. You are dismissed for lunch. After that, return to this room to meet your senseis. Hitaki Kakashi. Why does that name seem familiar to me? As he exited the classroom, the redhead pondered. Tick-tack. Tick-tack. Normally undetected, the sound of the clock reverberated strongly in the now quiet classroom. After nearly 2 hours of waiting for their sensei to arrive, only Team 7 remained after the other teams had already departed with their respective senseis. The recently graduated genins used their time in various ways in the interim. Sasuke meditated silently the whole time. It was unclear what was going through his head. His periodic eyebrow twitch, which occurred each time Sakura attempted to get his attention, was the only thing that distracted him. On the other hand, the girl was caught in a vicious loop where she would stare at her crush, consider methods to get close to him, try, fail terribly, feel depressed, and then repeat the process. Even she became weary of this after a while. She was now attempting to contain her mounting annoyance at their sensei's tardiness. The redhead attempted to nap in order to regain some energy as soon as he knew their sensei was running late. It was a complete flop, of course. Sakura began talking every time he was on the verge of falling asleep. He considered giving her a piece of his mind at one point, but he swiftly rejected the notion. Now that they were on the same team, he didn't want their new relationship to get off to a bad start. The redhead accepted that he would have to wait patiently for their sensei to arrive as he was unable to nap. But his tolerance had long since run out. He rose from his chair and began to pace back and forth because he could take it no longer. Sakura made an indignant, "Hey, Naruto, can you be quiet?" question. It could even appear to the more cynical that the girl was taking her frustration out on the redhead. TCH, what the hell is this guy Kakashi doing to be so late? It's been more than 2 hours since he was supposed to be here. Humph, do you think I don't know that? Walking back and forth and complaining won't make him show up. It's just annoying me and Sasuke-kun. The redhead couldn't help but frown at the pinkette's reply. I'm going to choke this bitch if she continues to swoon over Uchiha at every opportunity. However, the delinquent's eyes expanded and a broad smile appeared on his face before he could respond with a scathing rejoinder. Oh, yeah? Then what's this? A man emerged from the classroom as soon as the criminal finished speaking. He stood around 1.81 meters, 5 feet 11 inches, tall and wore the typical clothing of a high-ranking Konoha shinobi, with the exception of his hite-aid, which covered his left eye like an eye patch, and a mask that covered the lower half of his face. To put it briefly, his dark gray right eye was the only feature of his face that was apparent. Apart from that, his silver hair gave him a remarkable aspect when combined with his spiked haircut. The newcomer said, I assume you are Team 7? Sakura was stunned to learn that this was their sensei, but her mood quickly changed when she noticed Naruto's shit-eating smile. The pinkette pouted and puffed angrily, turning her face away. The redhead turned to his teacher after admiring his teammate's reaction and angrily said, You're late. The recently graduated genins could only gape at their sensei's ludicrous explanation. Ma, a black cat crossed my path, so I had to walk around the village to avoid bad luck. The shinobi with silver hair slowly examined each of them. The redhead noted that the older shinobi's increased attention was accompanied with a feeling of strangeness, and his eyes lingered a little longer on Sasuke's appearance and particularly on Naruto's. The seemingly smiling eye just made his students more agitated. How should I put this? My first impression. I don't like you guys, he said. Anyway, meet me on the roof. Kakashi then disappeared into a cloud of smoke. The redhead asked himself, what's up with that guy? As he glanced at his teammates and questioned whether what had just transpired was true. Nearly 4 minutes. Quicker than I anticipated, but not as quickly as I would prefer. All right, everyone, take a seat in front of me. Kakashi couldn't contain his happiness as he saw his classmates struggle to find their seats. Kakashi said nonchalantly, okay, how about we start with some introductions? Sakura asked, a little uncertain, what do you want to know, sensei? Kakashi shrugged and said, the basics, you know. Things like likes, dislikes, hobbies, dreams. That kind of stuff. With Sakura's swift backing, Naruto remarked, why don't you start first? Yeah. You seem a little suspicious. Kakashi was amused by his new student's actions once more. Oh. Me? My name is Hitaki Kakashi. I'm not really interested in telling you my likes and dislikes. As for dreams for the future. Well, I have several hobbies. Sakura mumbled to her companions in shock, so, all we've learned is, your name? Seemingly unaware of the pupil's reaction to his introduction, Kakashi said, now it's your turn. How about you, the redhead, start. The redhead's initial smile vanished as he said, all right, my name is Naruto. I like ramen, especially when someone else is paying for me. What I dislike, are traitors. The Mizuki incident undoubtedly left scars. He will learn a valuable lesson from this, Kakashi thought. As for my dreams, I want to be Hokage, the redhead replied hesitantly as she cast her gaze to the ground. Neither the stoic Raven nor his sensei missed this. In a lighter tone, the juvenile said, as for hobbies, I guess pranks count, right? Right, replied Kakashi. Your turn, sulking. My name is Uchiha Sasuke. There are many things I don't like, and nothing I truly like. What I have is not a dream, but an ambition. I will revive my clan and kill a certain man, Sasuke abruptly concluded. Very cool. Sakura let out an inside cry. HRRR. Given the torrent of sensations Sasuke was producing, it was difficult for the redhead not to throw up there. A congenital coldness of melancholy, a smothering sense of sorrow, and a hatred as intense as lava coursed through his body. Sasuke should kill whoever he wants to kill right away, As he tried to gather himself, Naruto thought, if it's always like this when he brings it up, I won't be able to stand being on the same team as him. Kakashi narrowed his gaze and thought, as expected. Okay, lastly, the girl. My name is Haruno Sakura, what I like is. Hehehe. Well, the person I like is. Hehehe. Should I say my dreams for the future? Hehehe. Oh my. The lad was irritated by the pinkette's clear reference to Uchiha as she stole looks at him. Sigh. At this age, romance is more appealing to girls than just sex. And what about your dislikes, Ino pig? Was the girl's loudest cry. The genins were taken aback when Kakashi said, okay, now that the introductions are done, let's get to the point. Our test will be tomorrow. With suspicion, Naruto questioned, test? What kind of test? Kakashi replied, a survival test. Why that? We've already done plenty of those in the academy, Sakura inquired. Hehehe. The newly made genins were uncomfortable as Kakashi burst out laughing. The redhead said, hey, what's so funny? It's just that, if I tell you, you'll definitely freak out. The three genins started to feel uneasy about what Kakashi was saying after hearing their sensei's reaction. Out of the 27 graduates, only 9 will become genins. All the others will be sent back to the academy. This is a test with a 66% failure rate, Kakashi remarked, quite seriously. There's a problem here. I would have noticed if that many students had been returned to the academy. With suspicion, Naruto thought. I can't fail here, TCH, Sasuke thought. I can't stay on the same team as Sasuke-kun if I fail, Sakura thought, startled. The Jonin said, he, I warned you. Anyway, meet me tomorrow at Training Field 7, at 5 a.m. Bring all your shinobi gear. Ah. I almost forgot, don't eat breakfast or you'll vomit. Yane. The Jonin vanished in a cloud of smoke as previously. Sakura followed Sasuke as soon as he left, attempting to ask him out on a date. Sigh. I thought those two would want to talk about the test tomorrow. It's better this way, now that I think about it. The redhead consoled himself as he walked away, saying, if I got too wrapped up with them, I wouldn't have time to go to my appointment and examine this test. There are a wide variety of stores in Konoha's business district. As one of the Land of Fire's busiest cities, the town had a sizable population to both provide and consume a wide range of things. However, because Konoha was a military center, the merchants that supplied the shinobi troops were the most powerful in the village. Since the village's inception, entire clans of artisans had established themselves, and they currently handled the majority of the local trade. Right now, one of those Higurashi clan-owned stores was in front of Konoha's top offender. The Higurashi had a certain notoriety, particularly when it comes to custom-made goods, despite being merely a branch of a bigger clan. Naturally, Naruto was unaware of that. After all, he wasn't there to make a purchase today. The young attendant asked in jest, look who finally showed up, did you actually make it this time? Her dark brown hair was pulled back into 2 buns, and a small fringe framed both sides of her face. She appeared to be about the same age as the redhead. They say the third time's the charm, Tenten, the redhead said with his trademark smile. The orphanage was where the 2 young people originally met, and they had known each other for a long time. Many things have transpired since then, such as a conflict following Tenten's adoption by the Higurashi clan. But it didn't take long for them to make amends, and ever since, their friendship has only gotten stronger, especially since Tenten's clan's store was one of the few that didn't mistreat Naruto. Despite their friendship, they hadn't seen each other much lately due to Tenten's hectic schedule juggling her responsibilities as a genin, training, and helping out at the shop, in addition to everything that had happened with the redhead over the previous year. Alright. What can I help you with today, Aniki? A new set of shuriken or kunai? And what's up with those marks on your face? It's a long story, I'll tell you another time. Actually, I need your help with something. The young woman frowned and moaned, SSSHH. Here we go. If it's something involving your pranks, I'm out. The former troublemaker swiftly said, No, I've retired from pranks, Tenten. What I need is some information. Suspicious, Tenten said, Hey. What kind of information could I have that you'd want? With a rare look of seriousness, the redhead asked, What do you know about the genin exam? So it's about that. I don't know if I'll be much help. Every Jonin sensei has a different testing method, you know. The redhead let out a displeased moan upon hearing that. Phew, that complicates things. How about this? I tell you how my meeting with my sensei went, and you help me understand a few things. Naruto could see what the young woman was implying when she said, I don't know, it's almost dinner time, and I'm starving. The redhead rolled his eyes and replied, okay, I got it, I'll buy you some ramen at Ichiraku. The girl said, I like how quickly you catch on, Aniki. Just let me go tell dad, before hastily removing her apron. Glup glup, the young kunoichi finished listening to the redhead next to her before swallowing the leftover ramen broth without any formalities. So, is that it? What do you think? I don't think you're crazy. This whole situation is really strange. When did you start wearing that thing between your ears, Aniki? Tenten said, chuckling. The delinquent's eyes briefly took on a melancholy shine, but it vanished like a mirage, leaving just his typical smile. Hey, know that I'm very good at using my brain, you guys just don't recognize my genius yet. Keep telling yourself that. Back to the subject, this whole sending students back to the academy. As far as I know, the success rate is correct, but those who fail are sent to the reserves. Naruto raised an eyebrow and said, and what's this reserve? The kunoichi sighed and said, 2 more years at the academy didn't help at all. Huh? The reserve is a pool of various genins, they don't have a fixed team, and all their training is self-taught. Passing the genin exam gives you the chance to have a jonin training you, and trust me, it makes a huge difference. I see. But then, why would Kakashi lie about this? The redhead was quite perplexed by that. He had been very aware of what his senses might pick up from the jonin throughout Kakashi's presentation, and when he looked at Sasuke, all he sensed was apathy, occasionally humor, and melancholy. The masked jonin's remarks concerning the test and skipping breakfast were the main source of humor. Even though Naruto didn't fully understand his power yet, if he had to guess, he would say that Kakashi was experiencing the same thrill as he would when pulling a practical joke on someone. My best guess is that he wants to put you under pressure. That idea that, under pressure, you get to know someone's true colors, you know? Glup glup, as he finished drinking the ramen broth, Naruto boldly said, well, that's not going to work on me. The girl remarked with a disturbed expression, but this Kakashi seems pretty tough, doing this kind of mental game even before you're a team. I don't know if I should congratulate you or be worried. The redhead gave a little typical giggle and scratched the back of his neck. The redhead thought about a certain white-haired chunin and said, honestly, I'd prefer it to be like this than having someone pamper me. If you say so. Well, if I stay longer, Dad's going to get mad that I left him alone. Good luck on the test tomorrow, Aniki. Don't be a stranger, Tenten murmured as she departed. The redhead waved and was about to walk away when he heard a slight cough. Bye, Tenten, see you around. The young Ichiraku waitress, Ayame, said, don't forget the bill, Naruto-kun. Hey, of course not, Ayame ne. With tears in his eyes, the redhead thought. Sniff sniff, Gama-chan's going to get so skinny. 3 individuals were visible in the center of a little open field along a stream. They had been there for some hours now, well before the sun came up. Sasuke was the first to arrive. He had no trouble getting up at this hour because his workout regimen generally started quite early. Naturally, this did not lessen the annoyance of the time he was squandering waiting for his sensei. I hope this doesn't happen often. It's enough that I lost time at the academy. I'll never be able to catch up to him if this continues, the Uchiha thought. He was also starving, as if that weren't enough. The Raven was beginning to question whether he should have actually obeyed Kakashi's order to skip breakfast. Sakura's predicament wasn't worse than his. In contrast to him, the young kunoichi was not accustomed to rising so early. The fact that the pinkette had gotten up even earlier to take care of her beauty in an effort to wow her crush didn't help either. She was too exhausted to flatter the Uchiha heir that morning, so it hadn't really worked. She was so tired that she even thought about taking a quick nap as they waited for their sensei to arrive, but she refrained from doing so out of concern that he could turn up out of the blue and chastise her. Sakura was also quite hungry. She hadn't eaten dinner the night before, in addition to skipping breakfast. The girl thought in sorrow, I think starting a diet this week wasn't such a good idea. Sakura glanced around and noticed her redhead teammate soundly dozing off beneath a tree's shade. How on earth is he able to be so carefree? To Sakura's dismay, Naruto, the last of the 3 to arrive, opted to take a sleep as soon as he knew Kakashi would not be arriving anytime soon. You know what? I should just go over there and use my fists to wake him up. How dare he sleep when we're so tired? Sakura thought to herself. However, a cloud of smoke materialized in front of the 3 before inner Sakura's wishes could be fulfilled. Hey, everyone, good morning, was Kakashi's informal greeting. You're late. The pinkette yelled, gesturing at the newcomer. Naruto was awakened from his slumber by this outburst and sat up idly, rubbing his eyes. In the meantime, Kakashi approached one of the 3 wooden posts situated in the center of the training area. He set an alarm clock on top of the one in the middle. Kakashi turned to the just graduated students, who were all staring in confusion, and stated, "Okay, it's set for noon." The Jonin held up 2 bells for everyone to see and said, "Here are 2 bells. Your task is to steal them from me before noon. Whoever doesn't get a bell will miss lunch," he added, seemingly grinning as he narrowed his eyes. "Not only that, but I'll tie you to one of those posts and make sure I enjoy a nice meal right in front of you." The sound of 2 rumbling stomachs filled the room as if on cue. "TCH. That's why he advised us against eating," the Uchiha muttered to himself. Kakashi turned to face the redhead and remarked, "Ah, I see one of you didn't follow my order." The redhead shrugged and said, "A shinobi should not follow absurd orders." With another of his eye smiles, Kakashi said, "He, if there's anyone here who learned that rule, it's you, isn't it, Naruto-kun?" The delinquent just scowled in response. Kakashi's tone turned serious as he said, "Ahem. As I was saying, you have to get one of the bells, and since there are only 2, someone will inevitably be left out. And that person won't just suffer all the things I said, they'll also be sent back to the academy." At this comment, the 3 of them could only stare in disbelief. That ticklish sensation once more. The redhead frowned and thought, if he was lying the last time, it means he's lying again now. The Jonin calmly said, "You can use any weapons you brought, face me with the intent to kill or you won't succeed." "But sensei, you'll be in danger," Sakura cried out in alarm. "Don't worry, your attacks are so weak it doesn't matter." Kakashi's remarks simply made the 2 youngsters in front of him more agitated. Naruto was about to charge at his sensei because he was already at the end of his patience, but he refrained from doing so because he remembered how powerful Mizuki was. Kakashi said, "These are the rules of the test, any questions?" The Jonin went on as none of them spoke. "If you don't have any more questions, go." Without further ado, the 3 of them vanished as soon as Kakashi had finished speaking. Kakashi stood in the center of the clearing, reading Icha Icha Paradise. The test had been going on for a few minutes, but none of his pupils had moved. "I'm not complaining. I just need more time to read this treasure." Kakashi looked about discreetly and couldn't help but be amazed. They are quite adept at hiding, though. Actually, where is Naruto? A person appeared in front of Kakashi, seemingly responding to his thoughts. "Hey, Kakashi-sensei, let's face off in a fair and clean manner," the redhead boastfully declared. "What is that moron doing?" As he observed the strange spectacle from his hiding place, Sasuke pondered. Without taking his eyes from his book, Kakashi answered, "You know, out of the 3 of them, you're the weirdest." The delinquent responded, "That's rich, don't you have a mirror at home?" and started to run in the direction of the Jonin. Regarding his student's allegation, Kakashi seems unconcerned. The team leaders were given access to a report that the academy created on every graduate. There was nothing the just graduated could accomplish that would need him to utilize more than his left hand because the Jonin was well aware of the 3 of their skill levels. But when the one-eyed shinobi saw his trainee stumble in the middle of his run, astonishment was unavoidable. Well, the report wasn't particularly positive, but to trip like that. Another set of eyes was keeping a careful eye on Kakashi while he was disappointed. Knowing Naruto's fighting technique well, Sasuke couldn't help but smile a little as he watched him stumble. The Uchiha heir thought to himself, "At least now I'll get to see Kakashi's level." At this precise moment, an unexpected event took place. Naruto used solely the strength of his left toes to spin his body and jump rather than fall face first to the earth. He kicked with his right leg as if everything had been prearranged. The redhead's strange move made Kakashi widen his lone eye, yet despite his surprise, he was able to avoid the blow. The blows that followed came from various angles and combined feints with unanticipated motions. The most peculiar thing was that, even though his posture was far from perfect, he moved with a remarkable amount of strength. More than one might anticipate from a recent graduate. "I see. That clarifies the report." According to the information Kakashi had received, the delinquent was a total failure when it came to Konoha's standard style, the Konoha Mai Kenpo, despite having exceptional physical aptitude for his age. The Jonin were uncomfortable because they were familiar with the academy's grading system. The redhead's grades would be impossible for someone who didn't employ any particular approach. There are obvious patterns, but the instructors must have assumed it was just random. Sasuke was the most surprised when he saw that Kakashi didn't even perspire in the face of a style that had always tested him to the limit because he knew better than anyone how hazardous the redhead's wild style was. I was aware of the significant disparity, however, this much? Did he learn this from someone, or did he figure it out on his own? I guess I'll have to wait and see if they pass. Although it's a pretty unconventional look, it has potential. As he idly sidestepped Naruto's blows, Kakashi thought, Guy would love to work on this. Damn it. Stay still already, Naruto said in a furious tone. Since you asked so kindly. Kakashi's form disappeared before he could finish speaking. Naruto started frantically scanning his surroundings after losing sight of his sensei. Sakura, who was seeing from a distance as well, was astounded by how quickly Kakashi followed her friend. That's the tiger seal, right? Alarmed, the kunoichi pondered. No way. Naruto will die if he employs a ninjutsu at this distance. That seal. It's for ninjutsu in the fire style. Is killing Naruto really what he wants to do? As he prepared to hurl shurikens at Kakashi, Sasuke wondered. Sakura yelled, Naruto, get out of there now, in a panicked manner. Naruto looked at his back, startled by the cry, but it seemed as though Kakashi's next words had already hit him. The Jonin muttered, too late, and started to move. However, the redhead's tiny smile went unnoticed, and Naruto just blew out like a bomb, shocking everyone in the clearing. What? Was that the jutsu of Kakashi? Sasuke pondered, already anticipating the worst. The smoke quickly dispersed, leaving only burnt wood where the two had been. Relieved, Sasuke thought, they must have used the kawarimi. Worrying me in that way. Dobi, you'll pay for this. Huh? The two of them. Where are they? Sakura was the most perplexed at the time, but she would soon receive a solution to one of her queries. Kakashi appeared from behind a nearby tree, his clothes barely covered in soot and grime. That was pretty close. Impressed, Kakashi thought, I might have had to visit the hospital if it weren't for that little smile. He only learned the Kage Bunshin, according to the information I was given. Did he conceal the fact that he acquired the Bunshin Daibakuha from sources other than the Scroll of Seals? At that point, Kakashi was unable to comprehend that it was an invention of his own rather than anything Naruto had learnt. The primary focus of the instruction he had been receiving over the previous few days was how to employ Kage Bunshin in various ways, blending it with other methods he was already familiar with. Naruto used one of his original explosive tags to produce a clone during one of these tests, giving the clone the ability to self-destruct at any time. Of course, there were flaws, like the fact that some of the explosion wound up inside the clone's density, which lessened its destructive force. Damn it, I boosted the explosive tag's power, but my Bunshin Bakuha no Jutsu was nothing more than a firecracker. I'll never be able to surprise him again. As he watched from his hiding place, Naruto thought frustratedly. Sakura was relieved to see her sensei in good health. That is, until she realized that by informing her red-headed teammate, she had revealed her position. Naruto, damn it, I'll have to make up for it later, Sakura pondered as she hurried farther into the woodland. Her flight was so hurried that she failed to notice the gradual darkening of the woodland and the fading of the surrounding tree trunks. The young kunoichi was already out of breath after sprinting for 5 minutes. As she struggled to gather her breath, the girl muttered, Harf. Harf, I think I lost him. What should I do? I guess my only choice is to form an alliance with Sasuke-kun. The pinkette had made up her mind and was about to go look for her crush when she heard leaves rustling. The kunoichi quickly located the source of the disturbance by searching about, and fear took over her face as soon as she saw it. Sasuke was standing in front of her, yet he looked theatrical. His left leg was horribly twisted 180 degrees. His left arm appeared to have been severed by a saw, and his torso was drenched in blood and covered in several kunai and shurikens. He only looked horrible when he was in pain. Sakura could not hear the dying Uchiha's words, Harf. Sakura-chan. Harf. Help me. The young girl fainted because the fear of seeing her beloved in that condition was too much for her to handle. Kakashi, still clutching his book, sighed as he observed the pinkette's condition from atop a tree. Before being struck by a flurry of shurikens, the Jonin remarked, I guess I went too far. It turns out that Sakura wasn't the only one pursuing her. Sasuke had done the same in the hopes that an opening would be created when his sensei attacked. Unfortunately, surprising someone of Kakashi's caliber would require a lot more ability. Only a wooden trunk that the Jonin used for his kawarimi no jutsu was struck by the shurikens hurled earlier. Sasuke raced as quickly as he could, knowing that something might occur. Unfortunately for him, he had to stop in the middle of another clearing because his escape was short-lived. The Jonin casually read his Icha Icha Paradise while reclining against one of the several trees around the clearing. "Tired of running, Sasuke-chan?" he said. "I'm not like them," the Uchiha heir remarked as he turned to look at his sensei. "Say that after you get a bell," the sensei said, flashing his trademark eye smile. The Uchiha didn't waste any time in throwing a left fist at the Jonin. Kakashi only needed to barely twist his body to dodge, so he didn't even attempt to defend. Unfazed, Sasuke carried on with his series. First, the Uchiha, who had passed by, stopped the Jonin's momentum and leapt to try an elbow blow without looking back, taking advantage of his slight movement. Kakashi's one eye narrowed when he saw this. That's it, then. Not too terrible. It would be worse to take the initiative and use the Hangeki Kenpo without the Sharingan than to use no style at all. However, to be so proficient in two styles at this age, it appears that I am dealing with a small monster. The Jonin learned from the accounts that the Raven sparred using Hangeki Kenpo, the style of his family. He was shocked to see the youngster employing Konoha Mai Kenpo because of this. Naturally, the Uchiha were unable to even touch the Jonin, just like Naruto. Nevertheless, he didn't display any signs of anxiety or despair. Nearly there, right now. The Uchiha launched a hasty retreat at this precise moment. As soon as Kakashi noticed this, he made the connection and was able to effortlessly avoid the onslaught of shurikens that the freshly set trap unleashed. Anticipating this, Sasuke started forming hand seals and moved in the direction of the Jonin's dodge. That day, Kakashi was taken by surprise once more. To use this jutsu, a genin shouldn't have enough chakra, the Jonin thought. Sasuke used his jutsu before he could flee once more. Kaiten. Gukakyu no Jutsu. The Uchiha's lips released a massive fireball that could easily swallow up an adult man. The Uchiha wasted no time in checking the outcome of his attack after completing his jutsu. He was shocked to see nothing there. Nothing? Did he evade once more? Where, if at all? To the sides? Going up? The Raven, desperately looking for his sensei, thought. Below you, Kakashi jokingly retorted. Kakashi's hands shot up from the floor and seized the Uchiha heir's ankle before Sasuke could comprehend the response. Doden. Shinju Zanshu no Jutsu. Sasuke let out a startled "ah" as his body was dragged underneath. You said you weren't like the other two, but your performance was no different from Naruto-kun's. Actually, since he wasn't caught. He even did better than you, huh, Sasuke-chan? Kakashi replied with his characteristic eye smile. The Uchiha could only snarl in annoyance, HRRR. As Naruto saw Sasuke try to grasp the bell, he couldn't help but feel terrible for himself. He's too strong, we have no chance. The test cannot be this. After witnessing how Kakashi treated him and his friends, Naruto's first doubts became certain. The redhead's inability to determine the correct response was the issue. What might it be? Come on, Naruto, consider. We don't have the strength to pick up a bell on our own, and the idea of sending us back to the academy is a lie. Hold on, by ourselves? That's all, the redhead thought. After a few minutes, Naruto was unable to detect Kakashi's presence. Then he leapt into the clearing and hurried over to his buried colleague. The redhead started provoking the Uchiha just as he was getting close. Well, who would have thought that the great heir of the Uchiha would be in such a state? I wonder what the girls at the academy would say if they saw your crush buried up to the ground like this. Tisk, tisk. The redhead pretended to be disappointed while grinning shamelessly. TCH, shut up. If you came just to provoke me, you can leave, the agitated Uchiha said. It's terrible enough that Kakashi defeated me. Now I have to put up with this fool's taunting. The redhead started talking, amusement visible in his eyes. And here I am wanting to lend a hand and help. The redhead's tone of voice was obviously amused as he spoke to his companion, but then his gaze abruptly shifted to the trees. Great, I was going to look for her, but she spared me the trouble. The team member ran out of the forest before Sasuke could ask him what he was talking about. Hey, Sakura, we were already coming to find you. Sakura's scared scream and subsequent fainting startled Naruto and the two young men. What do you know? Naruto thought to himself, I don't even want to know what's going on with her. The redhead yelled, all right, Teme, I'll dig you up and you take care of waking up Sakura. I need to talk to both of you. before swiftly making the hand signal and calling forth 5 clones, who promptly started excavating the Uchiha heir. "I don't have time for your nonsense, Dobi. The time's almost up," the Uchiha declared as soon as he was unearthed, turning away from the comatose Pinkette and the redhead. After dismissing the clones who had finished their assignment, Naruto went back to his buddy. "Trust me, Teme. I figured out how to pass this test." The redhead, accustomed to this mindset, was unmoved by the Raven's rejection. The Uchiha squinted suspiciously, questioning whether the redhead's words were worth hearing. "You know he's too strong for any of us to handle. Stop being stubborn and listen to me." Sasuke was all too familiar with this. Now that he had exposed the Gokaku no Jutsu, Kakashi would be on high alert, and the only thing he could count on was the element of surprise. "All right, Dobi, but if this is one of your stupid ideas, I give you my word, it's worth it. Now wake up, Sakura, we have to move fast. Our time is almost up." If Sasuke knew anything about Naruto, it was that the elder lad respected his word. The Uchiha chose to give him a chance after noticing his self-assurance. "Kakashi is too much for any of us to handle," he stated. "All I can hope is that what he has to say is truly significant." Humph. With nothing more to say, the Raven began rousing the unconscious Kunoichi. The Uchiha yelled out, "Hey," and shook Sakura's shoulders. "Huh? Is it the voice of Sasuke-kun?" The Pinkette cried out, "Huh? Sasuke-kun, are you okay?" and gave the Uchiha a frantic hug. "Hey, stop hugging me," Naruto mocked, ahem. If the lovebirds are done, we have more important problems to deal with, which infuriated Sasuke and embarrassed Sakura. Lovebirds. What's going on here?" the Pinkette inquired, glancing between Naruto and Sasuke. The redhead remarked, "I'll explain later. Let's get out of here before Kakashi shows up," as she and Sasuke started to go toward the trees. Sakura didn't hesitate to follow the delinquent after witnessing her crush doing so. "We don't have much time left, so I'll be direct. Kakashi is playing with us. This whole sending someone back to the academy thing is a lie." The Uchiha raised an eyebrow and asked, "And how are you so sure about that, Dobi?" The redhead thought to himself, "Let's omit the part about going to reserves. To start with, if students were sent back to the academy, I would know. I've repeated enough years for that," he added. "I doubt Sasuke would want to take the chance if he knew." "That makes sense, but what does that have to do with passing the test?" Sakura remarked. "Simple. In order for the real reason behind this test to exist." "Spit it out, Dobi. Didn't you say we don't have much time left?" "I was getting to that. The real purpose of this test is sacrifice." Sakura and Sasuke looked at each other, a little dubious about what the redhead had just stated. Naruto sighed and attempted to clarify after observing their response. "Look, isn't it obvious? He made up this whole story about sending back anyone who didn't get a bell to see if we were willing to put the mission above ourselves. This whole test is about the will of fire that Iruka-sensei talked about yesterday, remember?" Sakura grudgingly agreed after hearing this. "I hate to admit it, but that makes sense." However, Sasuke continued to ponder as he gazed at the redhead and inquired about the primary unanswered question. "And who will be the sacrifice?" Sasuke inquired, his expression already indicating that he would decline the position. Sakura looked away almost guiltily. Already anticipating these responses, Naruto couldn't help but think back to yesterday night's discussion with Inoichi.